Hey everybody, welcome to this live stream. This is going to be my most important video I feel like I've ever made, the most research that I've ever put into something, the thing I'm most excited for. If I could go back in time and tell myself that, Kara, one day you will be able to put together the most amazing clip show of beyond belief proof of Joseph Smith's fraud and plagiarisms, I would say, did you get your ADHD under control? And I'd say, yes, I did. And then everything would make sense. So welcome everybody. This is a really important topic for honestly just really showing concrete data-driven evidence that Joseph Smith was not the translator that he claimed to be, not the prophet, seer, and translator that he claimed to be. He was an author. He was a remixer. He was, I'll say, he was a fraud. He was a plagiarizer. And I have there's a lot of videos and there's a lot of things that can be said on this topic, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So I love live streams and I love just chilling with my friends and watching videos through a live stream. So what I've compiled for you today is the greatest clip show of all time of experts and people who have spent their whole lives studying these things. I'm talking about Mike from Mormon Discussions, clips from his videos with John DeLynn and Chris Johnson from the Ex-Mormon Foundation, and Grant Palmer, clips, Jonathan Streeter clips, all kinds of things that just really are going to create as much of a concrete picture that of the honest truth behind where Joseph Smith got the Book of Mormon, where he got a lot of the stories that come from the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham and all kinds of fraud. And I want to introduce my guest right now, probably one of my favorite people of all time. Welcome to my stream, Bill Reel.
How are you doing?
I'm so happy. Thanks for joining
This is
me.
exciting. This was fun when you reached out a few days ago and said, "Hey, you want to get together and riff a little bit on Joseph Smith's plagiarisms?" I couldn't pass up the opportunity. This is exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you guys don't know who Bill Reel is, Bill hosts Mormonism Live every Wednesday night on his YouTube and Facebook channel with RFM and Maven. Bill is, I would have to say, the single person who just spoke intellectually into my little, very brainwashed little kind of afraid to listen to anybody Mormon brain 3 years ago. And I thank Bill and I applaud Bill for his podcast and all the work that he's done and just his level of just big brainness that he's brought to this space and all the work that he puts into it. Bill lives in St. George now with his wife and does his podcasts and was a convert at 17 and now did some apologist stuff for a while. Anything else you want to add to your intro? People don't know who you are.
I've always been a big fan of giving people information and letting people make informed decisions. And I think laying out the data that you prepared today is a big step in that way. I run Mormon Discussion Incorporated. It's a nonprofit that has 11 podcasts on it. And we just try to inform people and give people information just as you're doing today. I'm really excited because I've seen the stuff we're going to go into, and these are all things that are really fun for me too.
I know. I'm so happy when people are excited with the projects that I have prepared. And so the basis of what we're going to get into is plagiarism in Mormonism, and I put a lot of work into this. And if you want to see more videos like this coming, please try to support my channel. Make sure you obviously subscribe, but I also have a donor box link in the description. I have links to all of my different social media things. I have my Patreon down there, which is a great way to keep these videos coming. I did quit my job at Mormon Stories. I am a mom. I do try to do this almost as part-time, full-time as I possibly can. So the more financial support that I can get, the more videos I can do, and the more my husband will give me time to make them instead of doing other things like getting other jobs, which
people don't realize how much time goes into this. And, I know very well that this is a labor of love on one hand. And on the other hand, it takes so much time and energy that you've got to have some financial compensation to make it worth it. Otherwise, as my wife almost did about 8 years ago, threw my computer out the front door because she was just tired of me spending so much time on it. So we all need some help to keep these things going.
And thank you. Thanks JC for being a patron to both of us. Also look out for my friend Kyle from Beyond God and Religion. I have another shadow work video coming out with him next Monday. And yeah, this is definitely a labor of love. I like to make videos. I like to make TikToks. I like to explain concepts in ways that are accessible to the most amount of people. So we're going to try to explain these things as basic as we can so the most amount of people can understand them and things don't go over your head. So basically, if I had to hard sell this video, I'm telling you, you guys, this is the data, this is the evidence. If you don't watch this video, you will never understand the depth of Joseph Smith's fraud. So I've got the best clips, and the first thing that we just have to mention off the top is let me pull up my slide. That the amount of plagiarism has been debated for a really long time, right, Bill?
Yeah.
And from strictly plagiarism, where you're copying words and phrases that you have the source text on, to just things that are taken from Joseph Smith's milieu. So there is a website called, trying to remember the name of it. It's in my bio. It's like mormonplagiarisms.com, I think.
Book of Mormon plagiarism.com.
There you go. And you can scroll that website endlessly, and there's PDFs and there's links. And so I encourage you, if you want to just like keep going down the rabbit hole, there's all of those kinds of things. But to be honest, I just listed just a handful right here. I'm going to get into some of these, but like the list can go on forever on just so many ways that Joseph Smith was remixing and taking things from his environment, as you do, passing them off as revelations and translations. With the more time, the more data we're allowed to collect, and you'll see that they just didn't have the technology. It's not our ancestors' fault that they joined the Mormon Church. They just didn't have access to the amounts of information that we now have access to. And let's go to so this clip, I hope it doesn't play automatically, which it's going to. There we go. So there's this amazing clip. I think it has over 200,000 views. So make sure you go watch the whole thing. But I'm going to play some clips from it. And Bill, feel free to pause anytime you feel like it.
Yeah, it's a great video.
So we know that there's pro-Mormon ways of interpreting data. Apologists do that. And there's more more cynical ways of approaching data. But how can we know what plagiarisms in this instance are actually going to be significant? And that's the root of it, is that apologists, they want to like smooth things over. They want to brush things under the rug. But I think people with critical thinking skills will know that some things are just more significant when we're talking about plagiarisms that cannot be smoothed over. So Chris Johnson of the Ex-Mormon Foundation YouTube channel talks about the various hypotheses on who wrote the Book of Mormon. And he starts by talking about how NHM, for the supposed bullseye that Joseph Smith named Nahom, which is the place that Ishmael was buried in the Arabian Peninsula, the story of like Lehi's family leaving Jerusalem in the first part of the Book of Mormon. But he's asking the question, can't you find those types of places drawn out with those three words, those three letters, I mean, through names all over the world? And then he kind of gets into the meat of what our computers can do. And this is the ultimate non-plagiarized video. Bill, do you ever feel like everything that's already been written about Mormonism, you're like, I don't even want to like rephrase this. I was like, this has already just been written perfectly. I'm just going to show that, you know.
I copy and paste all over the place, right? Like that the idea is like somebody's already done it and done it well. And so, yeah, give them credit, but like, let's show their work because it's going to be much quicker than you and I trying to explain it.
Yeah. I'm like, let's just do that. So, he gets into what our computers can do. But I wanted to read this. So there's a poster on Reddit that said that like I was looking at Reddit posts about Chris Johnson and I was researching this, and so many people have like amazing things to say about this, that like this was their ultimate like, you know, shelf breaker or whatever. So too bad it's literally the smallest thing on my screen I've ever done. So to introduce this clip, so you know that it's awesome and you're going to want to stick around because I have a lot of clips. A must-watch for those who like logical and well-researched explanations of what literary texts influence the Book of Mormon. Chris uses the same program universities use to detect plagiarism on the Book of Mormon and compares it to contemporary novels that were in Joseph Smith's community. There's definitely more to it than just a few lucky phrases that happen to be in both works. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. All right.
Yeah. I'll just add, you know,
Go ahead.
in all of the stuff that we're going to cover today, there's two ideas I want people to pay attention to. It's not all or nothing, where it's not, you know, this isn't a black and white world we live in. So on one hand, I think there are sources that Joseph Smith is, because it's common to his day, there is overlap or similarity simply because it's the same societal context that he's growing up in, right? So there are books that Joseph Smith, his work closely resembles, even though he may have never read the book, for instance. And then there are other issues where there is what appears to be blatant plagiarism. And you got to make room as we go through all these sources that you will run into both of those things, that we can show work that is extremely similar because it's Joseph Smith's cultural context that he's in. It's the language that's used. It's the ideas that are kind of going around in everybody's head. And then there are other ones that are so direct, it seems as if Joseph Smith likely lifted it from the very source that we share.
Yeah, and that is a perfect introduction to these Chris clips. Thank you. All right. Let's do this one.
There's over 70 Book of Mormon place names. And you can look anywhere. For example, in Japan, there's over a dozen Book of Mormon names in Japan. These are place names. And the same in India. You can look at India, and there's about 11 at least. I mean, there's millions, millions of place names in India. But wherever you look, you can find Book of Mormon place names. I analyzed 2,648 cities. By mere chance alone, 31 Book of Mormon cities matched out of 2,648 cities. If these results hold for larger sample sizes, they would then analyzing a set of 100,000 place names should yield over 1,000 Book of Mormon place names just by chance. So, conclusion: the world should contain tens of thousands of Book of Mormon place names by chance. Therefore, neither match is significant, and everybody would still be wondering, well, what's true and what's false? So the LDS scholars have confirmed a lot of Book of Mormon place names. Now, I think we should give them a hand of applause. That's a
Yeah. So what I just want to like kind of point out from the very beginning that we're trying to match not just, you know, word for word things. We're trying to match things that are unique and show more evidence of actual plagiarism and not just things that are just generally in Joseph Smith's time period and milieu. And when people are kind of it's the word aggregate the data. Is that the word I'm looking for here?
Yeah.
When people are trying to aggregate the data, what's really important about the way that Chris designed this program to work is that he takes out things and puts more weight. He takes out things that are common, that are going to be found in the Bible, and he forms the algorithm in a way to highlight the more unique phrases, which is the key thing that I want people to understand. Things that are super unique. He talks about how, like, if you see the word Millennium Falcon in a text that's like anachronistic or whatever, it's going to be a lot different than if you see the word like he is. You're gonna know that there's a lot more weight that needs to be paid attention, that a lot more weight and needs to be given to that. I've made my point. Sorry for.
And as you're pointing out, I mean, the idea that Nahum is like the greatest evidence that apologists kind of hold up now, right? There was Nahum and chiasmus, and chiasms are completely done. Like we no longer use that really as an evidence because we find it so many other places. But the idea that apologists hold up NHM as a direct hit, and that's the big evidence. You hear Jim Bennett, Patrick Mason, you hear all these guys point to that. And the reality is, as Chris there hits on, when apologists do that, they're playing a game with you, where they're pretending that something, and maybe they believe it, but they're pretending that something is a serious hit, when in reality, as Chris just pointed out, there are 10,000 places. There's whatever he said there was in Japan, 1,000 places in Japan, that if we wanted to, if the Book of Mormon was proposed to have happened there,
right,
we would have found hits, and the apologists would be holding those up. Yes.
Exactly. That's why I love you chilling with me. We're just like vibing here. So yeah, and then after that clip, again, go back and watch the full thing. It's really interesting. And in that presentation, Chris talks about the suspicious problems with the Book of Mormon. Like there's no precedent for God having someone translate an unknown language by the power of God before that we know of. And like there's how the golden plates that have this unknown language scribed into them by ancient Jews who sailed to America from Jerusalem, wrote an unknown language called Reformed Egyptian. These are all suspicious problems, right? That very book was then taken up to heaven by an unknown angel that is witnessed to by the book itself. You know what I mean?
And 8 guys or 11 guys that didn't exactly see anything either.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. And that anyone who saw the golden plates were all suspiciously friends and family of the Smiths. So
Yeah.
those are all important context information to add into that. So if you guys want a good time, all you got to do is just watch apologist videos and just argue with the screen. My mom called me super negative the other day. She told, my mom will never see this unless she wants to have Mormonism proven false to her. My mom told my sister to stay away from me the other day because I'm so negative because I make ex-Mormon content. Even though my sister's an ex-Mormon and she watches my videos and agrees with everything anyway. But point being, am I negative? I don't know. All I do know is I just like to argue with apologists, even if it's in my bedroom alone. So when I am looking for a good time, I throw on Saints Unscripted. And this video, how do you feel about Saints Unscripted, Bill? Because some of their videos, they're just so highly well produced, but they just have giant holes in their logic. But yeah, tell me your thoughts.
I think when you are really young and you think you understand things, you don't know what you don't know. And
Exactly.
I told Brett Whitbeck, part of Midnight Mormons, I told him about a week or two ago, I said, you're young. And I said, I understand you think you know these things, but you haven't spent 20 seconds of the time that I have understanding all these concepts. And until you do, you're speaking from ignorance and you don't know what you don't know.
So true. So that is so perfect. Thank you for saying that, because what I want to do here is I'm going to play what the Mormon apologists have to say about something that's titled "Did Joseph Smith Steal from the Late War?" which was a book that was around in Joseph Smith's day. That is, a lot of people mention that one as one of the most likely places that he plagiarized from. And so what Mormon apologists have to say from Saints Unscripted, and then I'm going to play another clip from Chris that I think is the perfect intellectual rebuttal that destroys apologist boys kind of argument, because now we have computers to analyze the data of what an author writes like and what a translator writes like. And so no matter how solid they think their argument is making, you can't go up against the data and what our computers can do. So this clip is a little bit long, but stay with me. And I think it does a great job of at least explaining kind of the criticisms without actually debunking them. So it's actually a win for us. I don't know. Putting it back on the screen. You know what, guys? I'm still getting used to this. This way. Should we do this? Okay.
The Late War is essentially a history book about the War of 1812. It's written in scriptural language and was published in 1816. Essentially, the argument against the Book of Mormon goes something like this. The Late War uses words or phrases that also appear in the Book of Mormon. Therefore, it's logical to assume that Joseph Smith must have read this book, which there is no evidence of, and used it to construct the Book of Mormon.
Bill, do you think there's no evidence that he read the book when it was like given out to like every school child?
So first off, there are common themes and common language and common ideas that are going on in Joseph's cultural context. And I'll just say this too, first off, to what you said, there is evidence of books that Joseph Smith had that coincide with a lot of the plagiarisms that we are going to either talk about today or at least lead you to go study on your own. But also it needs to be said that, for instance, in Joseph Smith's Bible translation, we know today that he directly borrowed from Adam Clarke, for instance, right? There
100%.
were 2 scribes to that project. Neither of those scribes report Joseph Smith using Adam Clarke's commentary. In other words, just because nobody says Joseph Smith used something doesn't mean he didn't use it. And we actually have evidence on this end using science to know that he actually did have access and use certain materials that apologists would go like, well, we don't have any proof that he had that book at that time period. And the reality is, like, sometimes we do. And even if it isn't said by the scribes, it doesn't mean he didn't have them, again, such as Adam Clarke's commentary in the Bible translation.
Yeah, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
Correct.
It's a bold claim, and it's presented very convincingly. And we don't have time to explore every alleged parallel right now, but just to give you a taste of how this theory looks, let's explore one or two examples. In the late war, it says, "Sent forth a proclamation abroad, and it came to pass that a great multitude flocked to the standard of Columbia. They came in battle array against the..." And in the Book of Mormon, it says, "Sent a proclamation throughout the land, and it came to pass that thousands did flock unto his standard of liberty. They went down with their armies against the..." They seem pretty similar, huh? They're pretty suspicious. But there sure are a lot of ellipses in there. Well, let's take a look at what text has been omitted from these examples to see just how similar they actually are. Obviously, critics are highly manipulative in the way they present these parallels.
So, are the critics highly manipulative, or is the example that he chose of what a critic says just highly manipulative? That's so far my take. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah.
Are we just shut up like, oh, never mind, no parallels?
If we're going to make the argument that Joseph Smith has the late war sitting on the desk with his scribes, translating the Book of Mormon, and he's just reading it word for word, then these guys would get us. But that's not at all. Again, recognize, like, let's say Joseph Smith read this book. Let's say he borrowed certain ideas out of it. Then I think we wouldn't expect to see word for word plagiarism. For instance, good students who do plagiarize in school, they don't copy things word for word. They don't go on Wikipedia and just copy and paste word for word. You change things, you alter things, you make it a little different, but it's similar enough that it has the echo of the thing. And after a while, it begins to be overwhelming. And as we go through today's content, I think folks will see that it's not just a thing here or a thing there. There is literally dozens of examples of things that are overwhelmingly overlapping from sources in his culture.
Right on. All right. Should I press play?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That have been cherry-picked and conveniently smashed together.
That is one big pile of shit.
But for some people, I guess it makes total sense that Joseph Smith read the late war and was like, sent forth a proclamation. Yeah, I like that. Ooh, abroad. Yeah, I'll take that one too. I mean, if words like Nephi and Zarahemla were to show up in the late war, yeah, you've got an argument. But there's nothing like that. So if this is the best you can do, I mean, come on. The most extensive research I've found that holds to the late war theory has this awesome list of rare phrases that are found in both books, but are not found in the King James Version of the Bible.
So just hold on to your seats, folks. We're going to get into that. And he is a fool to bring that up because he will be disintegrated. Anyway.
Really quick, could you just show my screen for just a half a second?
Yeah, bro.
Just FYI, Maccabees has the word Nephi in it from the Apocrypha. Just a little note.
Oh, thank you.
So, like, if it said Nephi, there you go. Just a little.
Oh, I love you, Bill. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. And the Apocrypha, just in case anyone was wondering, that's also where Joseph lifted some of his ideas, in case you were wondering.
We know that his edition of the Bible that his family held had the Apocrypha in it.
And what's the Apocrypha, in case someone's not familiar?
Sorry. The Apocrypha is books that were kind of borderline whether they should be included in the scriptural canon or not over many of the councils that were held in early Christianity, early Catholicism. It was agreed upon which books make it and which ones don't. The ones that don't have been kind of kept aside so people can read them. Certain Christian religions accept them and some don't. Most Christian religions don't, but they are still seen as being pertinent to that time and useful to scholars. And
that was a perfect explanation. I just have a favorite TikTok/YouTube video of mine that I made, because you know that one Hugh Nibley challenge of like, could you write the Book of Mormon? You have to write it about ancient Tibet. And there's a video, you know that challenge I'm talking about, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Hugh Nimbley's all like, you could never write the Book of Mormon. You have to have it at this time period about things you know nothing about. You need to have like 600 unique names, and you need to write it in this many days. And there's this YouTube video that the church made where they took a bunch of missionaries and sat them down and told them that you need to do that challenge right now. And they're all like, but I can't. And it's like, those were the constraints Joseph Smith was put under. And I have a YouTube video where I pretend I'm one of the missionaries who actually knows all of the other context. And I'm like, oh, I have to create 600 unique names. Can I borrow from the Apocrypha like Joseph Smith? I'm like, okay, where do I live? Let's see, Midvale, More Yankomer. And just like, the jokes write themselves. All right. Back into it. So yeah, we'll get into that graph that he brings up, which I don't feel like that was a good idea to bring up. Apologist boy, I'm sorry.
For example, and a part thereof. The only problem is that equivalent phrases actually definitely do appear in the Bible for this and several other phrases on the list. But again, the late war was purposefully written in a biblical style. It uses "and it came to pass" language. We should expect to see similarities in wording and phrasing between all three of these books. And even if Joseph made up the Book of Mormon, doesn't it make more sense that he would have mimicked biblical style from the Bible rather than some other book?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The simple fact remains that the similarities between the late war and the Book of Mormon are nothing more than superficial and fall extremely short of answering all the questions that need to be answered to explain away the Book of Mormon. The similarities are so superficial, in fact, that somebody with too much time on their hands and a point to prove actually went through and found over 100 similar parallels between the Book of Mormon and Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, including 5, 6, and 7 word-long phrases the books have in common. Here's the catch. Walt Whitman's book was published in 1855, decades after the Book of Mormon. Point being, finding two books that share similar scattered phraseology.
All right, do you want to sum up kind of his point there before I play the next clip, if you feel like it?
Yeah, I mean, he's basically saying it's so sparse, the words are so far separated that we just need to let go of this idea that Joseph Smith is plagiarizing from this book. It's easy that they isolate this book. We'll talk more about the late war, and I think there is some significance here. But there, again, there's so many examples of other sources that Joseph Smith is using to create his theology and his sacred text that this isn't the only thing. So.
Right. So I love watching these videos. And so I'm trying to create the ultimate clip show on the topic of plagiarism. And so when I'm thinking, what is the perfect rebuttal to that statement? Let me go ahead and play another portion of Chris Johnson's presentation here.
Oh, but we gathered up a lot of translators that that translated 2 different books from 2 different authors. And then we compared them against authors who wrote books. For example, Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Jane Austen, and others. So what we found was generally the trend was that authors wrote more similar books to themselves than translators were able to translate. So basically, that makes sense because if you're translating somebody else's work, it's not your words. But there is a translator effect. The translator is going to be using a little bit of their vocabulary, but it's not as significant as the author effect. So how does that compare with the Book of Abraham compared to the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Moses compared to the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Commandments, which was the original Doctrine and Covenants? We have all those books. We compared them up, averaged the score, and it shows up kind of like an author.
So just in case anyone can't see this really clearly, so translators are on the left in blue, comparing their works of translation from one language to another with phrases like phrases repeating being very low on average. And on the right in green, authors having a very high level of similarities, because authors who only write in one language are going to repeat similar things from themselves and from other English speakers and writers in their time, right? Makes sense. So translators, this is the point. This is what I want people to understand. This is why apologists, you guys, the church starts with the standard that Joseph Smith was a translator, not an author. So translators, like Joseph was claiming that he was, should not have so much resemblance to an author.
Right. That it looks as though what Joseph does is much more from the perspective of an author based on this set of data. And what he is doing is not translator work, which is working with other sources that he didn't originally write, in terms of the whole context, the whole text, right? And so he appears to be an author. Whatever he's doing, he's the one forming these things in his head. And of course, we're talking about borrowing from other sources, but that he didn't write the original text. Let me say it differently. On the left is the idea that somebody wrote an entire text by themselves, and Joseph Smith is the translator translating to a different text, and we wouldn't expect much of a matchup. But because we do see a significant matchup, it suggests that Joseph Smith is the author of the text that he's writing, even though we're also going to make the argument that he's borrowing from other sources within his context, but not wholeheartedly, right? A translator translates an entire book from French into English. And so if Joseph Smith is a translator translating Moroni's words and Nephi's words and Moses's words and Abraham's words, we would expect more of Abraham, Moses, Nephi, Moroni's words to come through, their own language, their own way of doing things. Instead, what Joseph Smith does looks much more like an author.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to have a great pillar of my testimony when I heard in testimony meeting one time, and I never looked it up, and I assumed it was true. That idea that, like, great scholars and people have studied the Book of Mormon, and it's just so complex, and it shows different writing styles from, these were obviously ancient prophets writing their different books in the Book of Mormon. And I think Chris Johnson also explains in this presentation that has actually pretty much been debunked, that you can tell that it is one author over time, and different authors would have a different, we would be able to tell from the data of plugging these words into computers. We can upload, he explains how they uploaded over 100,000 books that were written before 1830 to compare with Joseph Smith's writing. That's huge. And so these theories that the book is just so complex and it couldn't have been done. I especially just like the point that he's going to be borrowing from things that he said that are in his milieu that other authors have said, whether that is a direct, word for word, like we're going to get into in other places, or if it's going to be just like general phraseology that wasn't what an ancient prophet said. So anything else you want to add there, Bill?
Nope, that sounds good.
But we gathered up a lot of translators that wrote that.
I am a professional. Why isn't here we go. So what I thought was really funny about the Saints Unscripted thing is I feel like they just wanted to choose an example that had a bunch of ellipses in it. So should we find exact parallels without paragraphs of ellipses? Because we can absolutely do that. Stay tuned. And then should we actually be putting more weight on unique phrases instead of common ones? So let me play the clip of Chris talking about that.
Joseph Smith's own writing in 1829, about the same time as the Book of Mormon. We ran an analysis on this and compared it to the Book of Mormon to see if there's any similarities between Joseph Smith's own writing in 1829 to the Book of Mormon, which was written in 1829 and published in 1830. So here's what we found. All of those are 3-word matches that appear in the Book of Mormon. The darker orange is more significant. I can explain that a little bit more later, but those are, I'll explain right now. Millennium Falcon, I'll use this as an example. Millennium Falcon versus he is. Those are both 2 words, but one is more significant because it has more meaning, and the other one shows up everywhere. So certain types of phrases are more significant than others, and you have to account for that when you're weighting texts for analysis. Otherwise, you're going to get all sorts of noise in there. So you have to weight how significant each match is, which is a baseline. We need a baseline to compare against. We have one. So another interesting part about this is Joseph Smith, he wasn't a scholar. He wasn't very educated. So he has like a weird way of talking. But he is going to try. That is in the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, but it's no longer in the Book of Mormon. Of course, that sounds silly. But that, to me, is fairly strong evidence that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. We've got his weird, unscholarly sounding slang. It's in his letter, and it's also in the Book of Mormon. This is probably even stronger evidence. Joseph Smith, when he was 5 years old, his father, Joseph Smith Sr., had a dream. This dream was copied into the Book of Mormon and is changed into Lehi's dream, Nephi's father. I don't see how Solomon Spaulding or Sidney Rigdon would come up with that. So, if it was Joseph Smith, what influences can we detect with our modern big data tools?
Any reactions first you want to say to that clip, Bill?
Just the Joseph Smith Sr. dream is interesting. Lucy Mack Smith writes a biography of her family and really focuses on her son Joseph Smith, the prophet. And she records that Joseph Smith Sr. has this really, and he has a set of dreams, but this is one of them. And in this dream, he lays out his dream, and then Lucy records it in the biography. And it has so many parallels to the tree of life. And you'll hear apologists come in and go, well, like, yeah, well, with God, all things are possible. God gave both people the same dream. And what you recognize as we go through all these sets of data is that the apologists will always have an explanation for why we should dismiss it or ignore it or not pay attention to it. But start to notice how these things pile up, because your brain at some point will be overwhelmed at a certain threshold. As you deal with plagiarisms, and everybody has a different threshold. And hopefully, as you go through all of this and maybe do some research on your end when we're done, you'll notice just how overwhelming this is, and start to kind of accumulate these in your head as you think about them. Yeah,
perfectly said. And Chris also goes on in this to talk about how there are so many different conspiracies about, like, who could have possibly written the Book of Mormon. And I think it's helpful to say that, like, his style of writing is really evident. And sorry, burped into the microphone. His style of writing is really evident. And his own stories are going to be in there. So the conspiracies about who wrote the Book of Mormon besides Joseph, do you feel like, Bill, like that kind of just puts people on a wild goose chase trying to figure out like what source some other guy could have read? If we can just know for sure that it was Joseph Smith putting things into Mormonism that we know he either for sure had access to, like the Bible, could have had access to easily, like View of the Hebrews, or put things into Mormonism that he already had retold his stories or dreams that were important to his family. Do you think that is an important baseline to set, that we know that it was most likely Joseph being the plagiarizer as opposed to somebody else?
I think the majority of the Book of Mormon can be explained as either in the mind of Joseph Smith or the things that he would have understand or knew about or been in proximity of in his culture.
Yeah. And again, the narrative from the church is that he's a prophet of a restoration. He's a prophet, seer, and translator. Never once is he allowed to just be said, well, he's a prophet who's also like a remixer, and the revelations that he gets are going to be completely influenced by his world around him. What's the big deal? That's the apologist, smoothing that over answer now, but that's never how the church was restored. That's never how it was sold to people. That's not when missionaries go door to door selling. It's only when people come in contact with this overwhelming amount of evidence that they need to try to say something else. And the best you can come up with is that he was remixing things that were around him in his day. So I think if we want to talk like reasons behind that, obviously calling things translations from a divine figure back in the day just helps boost the validity of Mormonism. And it just depends on that kind of like strong language. Saying that you're just a remixer isn't all that convincing.
Yeah, you make a great point, which is you only have to look to the LDS Church, which is walking back all of Joseph Smith's translation productions: Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, Book of Moses, Bible translation, and the Kinderhook plates kind of as a little anomaly. And you notice the church's language and what it says about what each of those translation processes was, that they have had to change their rhetoric around it. So the Book of Mormon, you have the church starting to talk about it as a revelation instead of a translation. The Book of Abraham had to be moved to a catalyst theory because it was the only way to explain the evidence in a way that matched up with being a fraud. In other words, a catalyst theory is indiscernible from a fraud. They both look the exact same. We already have BYU saying that the Bible translation borrowed heavily from Adam Clark's commentary. That is so 180 from the way that we used to explain the inspired Bible translation, which was a corrupted Bible restored to its original form, right?
And Adam Clark apparently had a great idea about what God wanted to say there.
And so when you notice that the church is changing its own rhetoric around what Joseph Smith was doing, you can recognize that the critics are making headway.
Yep. Well put. I hope I am on track with my
Joseph Smith's own writing. And
I wish that these would not play automatically, but I can't get them to not. So I like talking, again, I love talking about apologist stuff. So if you want to help me deconstruct this. So from debunkingcsletter.com, is Lehi's dream actually copied from a dream Joseph Smith's father had? And the claim from the CES letter is that LDS General Authority and scholar Elder B.H. Roberts privately researched the link between the Book of Mormon and the View of the Hebrews, Joseph's father having the same dream in 1811 as Lehi's dream, and other sources that were available to Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and others before the publication of the Book of Mormon. So the question remains, is Lehi's dream being so similar to Joseph Smith's father's significant? So if in 1811 Joseph Smith Sr. had a dream, this is again an apologist. Oh, did it not get on the screen? Oh no, gosh, Kara. Add to screen. This one. There we go. So sorry. So again, this is like the apologist, and they go through and they list Lehi's dream comprises a very small portion of the Book of Mormon text. We don't care.
As if we should dismiss it for that reason.
Okay, nobody cares. The details of the dream were written long after the Book of Mormon was published. Lucy's manuscript for Joseph Smith, the prophet, and his progenitors for many generations, which she dictated to Martha Jane in the winter. Okay, the dream was written down a long time later. Sounds like it was kind of an important family dream that was probably retold around the table while you guys didn't have TV. So I don't know. That doesn't do a lot for me.
It seems like apologists there are wanting to say, look, it's recorded so late that maybe Lucy Mack Smith is misremembering her husband's dreams. But again, these dreams seemed really important to him and really important to her and their family. What is the chances that she remembers a dream A, but she's actually accidentally recounting the Tree of Life vision? That seems like would require a lot of conjecture to make that connection.
Do we even have evidence that his mom even read the Book of Mormon? Maybe she was just like, that's a nice project.
I don't think we have evidence that very many people at all other than Parley Pratt did.
I think that's fascinating. Also, huge shout out. Thanks for the super chat, Amy. That's super helpful. Bless your soul. So they go through and they list a couple of the common themes that are in both of them. And I'm going to do that in the next slide. I just kind of want to skip to the bottom where they say dissimilarities are also present, supporting that rather than plagiarism, God could teach similar principles through dreams to worthy recipients across generations and continents. And that is just a baked in like I don't know if it's like a presupposition kind of fallacy. I don't know what else you call that you are already starting. You're already starting with the assumption that God does that. Yeah. When you're also trying to prove the point that this book is also divine. It's just the logic is already tied into the logic that you're trying to prove when you haven't proven your first point to begin with. That just notice dumb.
Notice that the apologist wants to have it both ways, that they're saying like, look, this was recorded late. They want to give you a reason to go like, maybe it's misremembered. And on the other hand, why wouldn't we expect both people to be given the same vision from God? Like you can't have it both ways. But apologists are always creating multiple paths so that if you close the door on one, others are still available.
If you close the door on one, others are still available. That is the most perfect way to put apologists. They just like throw shit at the wall and hope that like one of them is something that sticks, that they hope that somebody will glom on, be like, I intellectually think that one makes sense. When they can, they can actually contradict each other.
Yeah.
Just whatever works. So, none of the family regarded the similarities as evidence that Joseph Smith was engaging in a forgery. Yeah, none of them cared when he said, "Hey, go take a second wife," either. Like, they didn't care about a lot of stuff. I don't know why that's
Right.
I don't know why that's an example to dismiss this either. And then, yeah, then the last point that basically you already made, that they said, well, it's possible that Lucy's late recollection was influenced by her already reading the Book of Mormon. So let's go ahead and read the Missing Sunday has so many good memes, and they laid them out pretty perfectly. So I'm going to read the story of the Tree of Life visions, one from Joseph Smith Sr., recorded, purported to have happened, I think, in 1811. And then, Bill, you want to read the Book of Mormon, published in 1830. And I'm gonna, for theatric emphasis, read the bolded parts, and you read the bolded parts with theatric emphasis too.
I'll try to sound like those Book of Mormon CDs.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
So, Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream says, I was traveling in an open, desolate field.
I beheld a large and spacious field.
The road was so broad and barren.
Leadeth them away into broad roads.
What do we got? I'm imagining a big field, broad roads.
Yeah.
I came to a narrow path.
I also beheld a straight and narrow path.
I beheld a beautiful stream of water.
I beheld a river of water.
Somebody got a thesaurus, I can tell. Just kidding. I could see a rope running along the bank of it.
I beheld a rod of iron, and it extended along the bank of the river,
in which stood a tree such as I had never seen before. It was exceedingly handsome.
Oh, sorry. And I'm sorry, I thought maybe you left a word off there. I thought I was waiting for you to finish. So it says, and I looked and beheld a tree, and the beauty thereof was far beyond, yea, exceeding of all beauty.
So we got a field, we got a river, we got a path, we got something to hold on to. Where is it leading to? Something that's beautiful, they're basically horny for what's at the end of the path. What is it? It bore a kind of fruit, in shape much like a chestnut burr, as white as snow, or, if possible, whiter.
I beheld that the fruit thereof was white, to exceed all the whiteness that I had ever seen.
Your voice is so good.
Yeah.
I drew near and began to eat of it, and I found it delicious beyond description.
I did go forth and partake of the fruit thereof, and I beheld that it was most sweet above all that I had ever before tasted.
As I was eating, I said in my heart, I cannot eat this alone. I must bring my wife and children, and that they may partake with me.
I began to be desirous that my family should partake of it also, for I knew that it was desirable above all other fruit.
Oh, you want to share your horny fruit tree with your family, don't we all?
Look at that.
All right. I'm gonna need to put on a better podcasting voice. I'm gonna try to match you.
Okay.
As I was eating, I said in my heart, wait, did I already read that? Shit. I beheld a spacious building standing opposite the valley which we were in, and it appeared to reach to the very heavens.
And behold, on the other side of the river of water, a great and spacious building, and it stood as it were in the air, high above the earth.
Something's reaching the heavens in a building. They were all filled with people who were very finely dressed.
And it was filled with people, and their manner of dress was exceedingly fine.
I feel like the case is made. Two more, though.
Yeah.
They pointed the finger of scorn at us and treated us with all manner of disrespect and contempt.
They were in the attitude of mocking and pointing their fingers.
What was the meaning of the spacious building which I saw? He replied, it is Babylon, and it must fall.
And the large and spacious building which thy father saw is vain imaginations and the pride of the children of men. Now, this is Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream on the left, and this is the Tree of Life vision that Lehi had, that Nephi then rehad and interpreted. These are thousands of years apart, and yet here we have Joseph Smith Sr. having a dream that is extremely similar, to the point where nobody on the faithful side is claiming these are different. They're saying, yes, they're the same. And our best explanation is that Joseph Smith the Senior and Joseph Smith, the prophet as he's translating, are that Lehi essentially had the same exact vision of sorts that Joseph Smith Sr. had. And again, in light of everything else, at some point, if the data is overwhelming, your brain should go, there's a better explanation for all these problems.
Yeah, precisely. So, and I also think it's funny. I've read different apologists reviews and stuff, and just the way that they want to focus on like what's not there without, if they want to look at like the tiny piece of poo and not like look at the giant mountain. I don't know who they think they're fooling. That was one of my biggest problems. Is I always like to say that fair Mormon and Mormon apologists, they were like the last pit stop on the way out when people were genuinely looking for answers and being like, wait, why do you want me to focus on this when you're ignoring this entire mountain over here? You know, it's just, it's pretty obvious. But I've read other apologist things that they're like, well, his didn't say Babylon and his did. And it's like, are you not able to like go with the concept that sometimes you switch out phrases and like have different similes, different metaphors, but they're all like in the exact same vein of the same story, trying to like put across the same ideas. Apologists think that we're a lot stupider than we are, but hey, they do make a living. So
of course we would expect Joseph Smith to put another source, at least in part, in his own words, right? Why wouldn't he? Why would we expect him to have, hey, Dad, write your dream down so I can take it into the translation room and so I can write it down word for word? No, he heard his dad tell the dream, and then when he recounts it for the Book of Mormon text, he puts it into his own language. But he knows the dream well because it was important to him and his family.
And they didn't have TV.
No.
They were bored a lot telling stories. Yeah.
Storytellers. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's do this view. So back to those rare phrase matches. This is from a website, wordtree.org/the late war. And using that kind of program that Chris Johnson was talking about, a lot of people got their hands on it and started plugging in different things into it. And so if you notice on the left, there's a bunch of blue dots, and each blue dot is a book. And there's numbers of words in that book, and that goes all the way to the top. The total number of books in this graph is over 100,000. And so it says rare phrase matches. These phrases are rare, meaning they are not found in other contemporary books of Joseph's time, and they are not found in the King James Version of the Bible. The strength of the argument that the Book of Mormon is a remix of the late war rests on the cumulative improbability of finding all of these phrases somewhere else. No other book, aside from the first book of Napoleon, approaches the density of rare phrases, 4 grams specifically, that are shared in the Book of Mormon. Oh, shoot. I hate when I press the button I didn't want to press. Okay. And then it says at the bottom, note that there are perhaps thousands of matching phrases between the late war and the Book of Mormon, but we do not consider common phrases to be important in linking the two books. For example, phrases from the Bible that are found in both books, such as blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, do not meaningfully connect the two. It's simply understood that they have a common ancestor, and we ignore those influences. So like I was saying, the blue dots of a lot of the books that were written before 1830 that were plugged into this computer system here. You have books like Pride and Prejudice from 1817. And there's a lot of words, but it doesn't have as much of the non-biblical matches with the Book of Mormon. And so the yellow lines that are going straight out, you have things like the Late War and the Book of Commandments and the Book of Moses and the Book of Abraham and the Book of Napoleon that are all a lot lower towards the bottom, meaning that they don't have a ton of complex words in them, but they do have a lot of matches to the Book of Mormon, which I think proves Joseph Smith's authorship instead of translationship. But what do you think, Bill Reel?
It's interesting. The Book of Commandments, which is Heavenly Father talking directly to Joseph Smith, right? Joseph, write this down. Here it is. Notice that's extremely similar to the other text within Mormonism's translation stuff. In other words, Joseph Smith's language comes through all of his translation productions. And there are a handful of other books that seem extremely close. As you mentioned, the first book of Napoleon and the Late War, and they are much closer by far than the other 110,000 and 767 books that are represented by a blue dot somewhere on that screen.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, you should know, like, we would expect that God talking to Joseph directly and telling him what to put in the Book of Commandments would be very unique. It would be Heavenly Father's sentence structure, his words, his rhetoric, his vernacular, but it's not. It seems to match up with Joseph Smith in all of the other translation productions.
I'm trying to put you on the screen. There we go.
Yeah. So anyway, I just think it's you have to note those things, that what you should expect, what we think we should expect as we look at the data is very different from what we do. And then you ask yourself, what's the most rational explanation for the data that we find?
100%. And I obviously have made like my conclusions, and I think that evidence is overwhelming, but I just want to remind people that I will have the links to all the videos that I'm showing. And I think I have the links to all the websites in the description right now. I was a good little worker bee and was up till 1 a.m. last night getting this whole thing ready for you guys. So, and also if you want to see more videos like this, where I actually spend a lot of time on them, please become a donor to my channel at DonorBox. Links in the bio. Thank you guys. All right. Anything else you want to add on that? Your comments are so useful. Thank you, Bill.
No, and by the way, we won't necessarily have to do it here, but the late war isn't just a quote or two. There's lots of them, and it's corresponding section of the late war matching corresponding section of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And as you go through 10, 15, 20 of them, I think there's more than 30 of them or so that are extremely close. The Apologist video. So the Apologist video you played a little bit ago, there's some truth to that. Like, some of these words are spread out a little bit. I agree. But when you have 90 sections in one book that are in different places that match 90 sections in another book in different places, there's a correspondence there that means something. And again, late war is just one out of 20 things that we could sit and show about what Joseph Smith's borrowing from.
Yeah. And thank you for making that point, because going along with the same point, I was trying to, double down with Chris talking about the weight that we pay attention to various different things, the placement of the story of the late war and those types of ideas being put into the certain war sections of the Book of Mormon. The placement matters. You have to give certain weight and credence to different areas, and you can't just wash everything that there's too many ellipses, there's too many this or that. If you're actually in an honest pursuit for truth and you just want to know what is actually true, is this actually a revelation like the church told me it is? Is Joseph Smith actually getting this? Did he put his face in a rock, in a hat with a rock that had words appear on it, with the same rock that he also used for 18 fraudulent treasure digs? Is God actually going to use that mechanism to give him these things? Or is there another more likely alternative? And the more and more that you go through this data, you have to just be committed to whatever is true. That's whatever the data, whatever has the least amount of conjecture is what I'm going to have to go with. Boom. Okay. Next. And then we're going to play this clip, and then we get to do the late war quiz.
It was published in 18...
let me just introduce this video real quick. I think it's really important. Chris sets up the perfect context of what the late war is. So if you've heard it going around in your own milieu, these ex-Mormon spaces, and you never really heard a good explanation of why it's so important and why it was so likely plagiarized from, this is a great explanation that Chris gives. But Bill, let me know if you want to pause and add any context at any time.
1816, yeah. 1816. Written in the scriptural style. This is a war. This is the second War of Independence. It's a small war with Britain that happened between 1812 and 1815 in Joseph Smith's lifetime. This is a war that he would have been hearing about his whole life, from childhood on to teenage years. Everybody would have been talking about this war. This is like us talking about 9/11. We were all there. We remember the day. This is the war for him. This is Joseph Smith's war that he lived through. He would have been there every day hearing the news as each piece of the war progressed. So 1812 to 1815, that's the second war. They wrote this in scriptural style for a reason, because they wanted people to read the Bible. So they wrote it for students in school in New York, so that people could be encouraged to read the Bible, and secondly, get an understanding of what it means to be American, to win the war against Britain, the lessons that were learned in that war. How did they win that war? Well, Moroni is Jackson. Jackson won the war by riling up the troops to fortify the city of New York. And because the city of New York was fortified, they lost almost no troops in that war, in that last battle. And Britain gave up because they couldn't get through because of the fortifications that they had dug up and built up around the city of New York in Joseph Smith's lifetime. They did that, and it's written in this book in an ancient historical style for students, which would have been, the students would have been what, like, I don't know, 11 years old or 15 years old. I don't know what age group, but that's how old Joseph Smith would have been when this book was published. He was born in 1805. This book came out in 1816. He would have been 11 years old in school reading this book. This is what the book was built for the students in New York. Now the late war.
Bill, you know you're on mute, right? So just wanted to give a little bit of context that this is, anything else you want to add? I just feel like the case is pretty clear that he would have had access to that one. So the parallels that we'll find really give you a taste that this is not ancient scripture. This is definitely remixed from the things that are around in his time period.
The only thing I would note is that the late war was written in Bible language.
It was published in 18...
And that was easy enough for the author to do. And hence, when we find Bible language sort of used in the Book of Mormon, we shouldn't be surprised by that. If we still also want to believe Joseph Smith's the author, it would be very easy for him to, because that's, again, no television, no internet, no computers, no iPods, no tablets, no iPhones. You're reading books, and that language is part of your culture.
Right.
Because that's the book you are all reading the most.
Perfectly said. Did you have something you wanted to show?
No. I'm just making notes as we go through all of these. When we get to the end, I want to kind of say, like, hey, these are the things we talked about. These should be overwhelming. They should be. And we'll see how that goes. Okay.
Thanks for everyone in the live stream. Leave a comment how you're so proud of us for doing this, and that you love us so much and you think that we're both handsome and wonderful. All right. Do you want to do some more reading with me, Bill?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Let me put this on the screen. Can you see that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So word phrases that match exactly are bold red. Words that are synonyms or have some connection but are not exact matches are italicized in orange. So on the left side, I'll be reading the late war quotations from different verses, different passages. And then I want to note the ellipses. If you guys see too many ellipses, you let me know where something was, redacted and taken out. So far, not a whole lot. And then Bill, you can go ahead and read the Book of Mormon. Perfect. So this is from a list, again, from wordtree.com/the late war. And when Saints Unscripted wants to pull their examples of what critics say, they could have pulled 100 of these, but they chose one with a lot of ellipses. Makes you wonder about the manipulation that they're after. I wonder who they're being paid by. Anyway, all right. So the left side, late war. But it came to pass in the same year that the people of Columbia were revenged of the evil. Did I say that right?
Yep. And it came to pass that in the same year the people of Nephi had peace restored unto them.
And if I'm going to skip that because that's a lot of words I can't pronounce. Wrongs committed against them be increased tenfold, and they shall be as a mock and a byword among all nations.
And shall become a hiss and a byword, and be halted among all nations.
Ooh. Now
seems close, doesn't it?
Very.
By the way, a little note too. Notice where these things are found in the book and where they correlate with where they're found in the Book of Mormon. The tendency, and it's not perfect, but the tendency is that the earlier in the Book of the Late War that these things show up, the earlier in the Book of Mormon they show up, and the later they show up in the late war, the later they show up in the Book of Mormon, and that should be a stark detail that means something.
Yeah, and that's really important when we're talking about the War of 1812 and a lot of war strategies going on. War this, war that were on the minds of people, and I'm sure Joseph Smith wanted to integrate. I can't speak right now. You know the word I'm looking for.
But do you notice what I'm saying though is that
Yeah.
The order in which these ideas are presented in the late war have a correlation to the order in which these ideas are presented in the Book of Mormon,
Right.
and which we would expect if there's a plagiarism.
Where
Yeah.
he's just like flipping through those pages. Also, hey, thanks, Mark. Thanks for saying we're awesome. Thanks for complimenting us. Anyone else want to compliment us? I did spend a lot of time working on this yesterday. Love you so much. Next one. And it came to pass that one of the strong ships of the king had approached the country of the south, which lieth many thousands of miles off, a place unknown to the children of Israel in the days of Moses.
And it came to pass that one other ship also did sail forth, and whither she did go we know not. And it came to pass that in the year there were many people who went forth into the land northward.
The officers and soldiers of Columbia fought bravely, and there were many slain and wounded on both sides. Nevertheless, the army of the United States rested nigh unto the place.
And it came to pass that they fought on both hands with exceeding fury. And there were many slain on both sides. Yea, and Moroni was wounded, and Jacob was killed. And it came to pass that he fought with Lib, in which Lib did smite upon his arm that he was wounded. Nevertheless, the army of Coriantumr did press forward upon Lib, that he fled to the borders upon the seashore.
Woo! So let's have it summarized. If you guys know B.H. Roberts, can you give me a quick description of B.H. Roberts?
Yeah, B.H. Roberts is I don't know if he's an apostle, but I know he was I think he was a 71st.
Was he church historian?
Again, I'm going to be a little limited here. You put me on the spot, and I'm not exactly sure of his official responsibility, but I know that he was called to explore what the critics were saying and try to discover whether there was any truth to it that the church should be worried about. And when he came back, he met with the Quorum of the 12, and he shared that there were lots of similarities and overlap between what Joseph Smith had produced versus what Joseph Smith could have potentially borrowed from. And he seemed to have been, on some degree, bothered by it.
Yeah, and you've got, people who are supposed intellectuals of the time, like James E. Talmage, who was supposed to be a scientist. And then when he's confronted with the problems of the Book of Mormon, hey, there's actually no horses here on the Americas. When B.H. Roberts and it's the Hidden Mormon Meetings of 1921, I think, is that it?
Sounds right.
Shannon Caldwell Montez has a great Mormon Stories interview on that, on her research about B.H. Roberts, Lewis visiting his testimony, and he brought a bunch of this information to the Brethren at the time. And there's just quotes from different leaders that are just atrocious about being confronted with things that are pretty much accepted now as fact. And James Talmage has a quote saying, "The Book of Mormon says that there were horses on the continent, therefore there were horses on the continent." End of story. Right. The Book of Mormon is going to trump what the actual research says. So there's this great quote that B.H. Roberts says, "Did Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews furnish structural material for Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon? It has been pointed out in these pages that there are many things in the former book that might have suggested many major things in the other. Not a few things merely, not one or two or a half dozen, but many. And it is this fact of many things of similarity and the cumulative force of them that makes them so serious a menace to Joseph Smith's story of the Book of Mormon's origin."
I feel like B.H. Roberts was like all of us, right? He went trying to prove the church true, and he ended up finding problems.
Yeah, and I gotta say, and I a 70, thank you. And I gotta say, in 2019 is when I lost my faith, and my husband was kind of on his way out, and I wanted to maybe be a Christian or take my kids to church alone, and I really needed to figure out if the church was true or not. And I was about to be like a mixed faith marriage. I had to really decide if the church was true. And I had a strong testimony of a lot of things that had to do with Christ and the spirit and things that had to do with spiritual inclinations, but not so much about the temple or the Book of Mormon. And so I was like, if I'm really going to do this and my husband and I are going to live a mixed faith marriage, I'm going to have to really investigate if this is true or not. And I spent 6 hours one night at my computer on Mormon Think. So it was July 12th, 2019. My shelf broke. It all came crashing down in one night. And the things that did it for me was that Chris Johnson talk that we were talking about. It's about the words of B.H. Roberts saying that it's such a menace that even people who were also trying to look for what's true, they can't find a path forward when you put these plagiarisms side to side. And that's those side to sides were the honest to God thing. That was the final thing that I read that night before I closed the computer at 3 a.m. and said, I'm never going to church again. And I was like, it's false. It's a false thing.
There's always these things, right? And they are overwhelming to us, and they're unique to us for the most part. Like, there are other people out there who get bothered by the same things, but it's not the same for everyone. And each of us are affected differently. But again, at some point, this all seems overwhelming, and we're not even that far in yet.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning of this video, we could just talk about all of these things over and over again. But if you're not going to actually be honest and look for these similarities, give weight to the things that need proper weight, you're not going to care that there's a mountain of evidence, you know. Hey, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your nice compliments. Makes it all worth it. Please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. Of course, like the video, leave a comment below for the algorithm. Everything that I do in my life is to try to make awesome content for this post-Mormon community, post-religious community. So my heart's in it. Hope you guys can support me. Financially is also great. So next thing I wanted to get into is so Grant Palmer, rest in peace, best spiller of the tea, best Alma the Younger turnaround story, but in the opposite way. So Grant Palmer, if you don't know, I'm going to read his bio. He's the author of An Insider's View of Mormon Origins and a couple other books, and great writer, written for Sunstone Magazine, all kinds of journals, and his list of positions and teaching environments. He's used to be a CES director, and he eventually retired early from being the CES director because he could no longer reconcile what his research showed with what he was asked to teach. So he's like the real OG. And if you guys are not familiar with Grant Palmer, I can listen to him talk all the time. He's so honest. He had, I don't know, 60 years in the church. What would you say, Bill?
Yeah, probably that long.
Yeah, before coming around, you could say. So there's this video from Ex-Mormon Foundation YouTube channel, Why Mormons, it's called My Aha Moments While Researching Mormon History. So I just want to play a couple points of what Grant Palmer, who spent 60 years in the church teaching for the church education system, what he felt like were some of the most clear examples of plagiarisms and remix and stuff. So I just want to link into talking about that for a second. So
and I think he had the church longer, but 34 years in the CES system.
That's my age next year.
Over 3 decades.
It's interesting how LDS people think if they find anything, science or history, that supports anything, that the church or Joseph Smith said, they latch onto that and they'll go with the Nahum thing, or they'll, how they do that. But really, they're deniers of history. They're deniers of history. They will not take a look at it. And so if the Spirit doesn't say it's so, that trumps science, that trumps history. And that's an important choice people have, because if the Spirit trumps everything else, then that's where you're going to end up. And that's what I told my daughter, that we'll just have faith, or stay in even if it's false, or go by your feelings. Well, that's why I think they've lost the war, because they really don't have any ammunition. They just not that effective. Well, all right.
What do you think of that clip, Bill? I'm just kind of
The
trying to
idea-
set the stage that these plagiarisms won't matter if you're not in an honest pursuit for truth. But
Yeah, I mean,
It's interesting how
we all understand what it meant in an earlier time when we believed. Like, I was all in. I wanted to be the best Mormon there could be. And I started with my beliefs. I know the Book of Mormon is true. I know that Jesus is the Christ. I know that Joseph Smith is his prophet. And then every piece of data had to be worked into that. And when things got too uncomfortable, I had to push that stuff away. And again, you know, when you sit with some of this, if you're a believer, it probably is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to learn that maybe your sacred texts are very similar to other things in Joseph Smith's contemporary culture, but so be it. And the question is whether you want to deal with it or not. And you know, we'll get into other ones here. There's a few that I want to kind of maybe see if we can put up on the screen and show and be really quick with, but there's so much pointing at Joseph Smith borrowed from lots of places that it really is hard to keep the foundational story of Mormonism meshing inside your head.
right. Well, will the audience also tell me if the sound is coming in a little bit? I think Bill's audio might be lagging for me.
I hear you good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, perfectly said. Should I go into the next clip?
Yeah.
So he's going to get into again, just he says there's some obvious sources that he pulled from. So let's see what Grant Palmer thinks.
I think you can show from 6 sources Joseph Smith produced 75% of the Book of Mormon right out of his own backyard, things he's familiar with. And our time is really going, so I'm going to have to be really quick here. First and Second Nephi is all about the Bible, a King James Bible, a 1769 edition of the Bible, because it carries the errors of that translation. This is not a mystery. Also, Joseph is using, it looks to be like several of his father's dreams. One right in chapter 1 of 1 Nephi 1, and another on Lehi's Tree of Life. Here's another source. Yes. What? Oh, do we?
Yay, then we all applaud.
All right, then. Second Nephi, half of those chapters are right out of the King James Bible, including the errors of the 1769 edition of the King James Bible. Wow. Did these come off brass plates of Laban? Or plates they dug out of the ground? I don't think so. These are very practical things, folks. That's First and Second Nephi. Jacob, Enos, Mosiah, Alma 1 through 42. That's all about Methodist stuff.
So let me pause it right there. So then we get into the really tricky territory of what I would call plagiarisms of Joseph Smith's King James version of the Bible that his family had in their home. And I have, I wish I knew how to make this not do that. God damn it. So what are 1769 King James Version edition errors doing in the Book of Mormon? And then again, we're talking about his translation process, which is now the mainstream apologists have all, except for the Rod Meldrum and their faction, they still stick to the old brass plates and there's no such thing as a rock and a hat. But the Gospel Topics Essays, the mainstream idea is now that Joseph Smith was using a rock and a hat to read and dictate the words of the Book of Mormon off of that. And so, Bill, do you feel like that seems like a problem to me? You're looking in a hat, it's writing words, and those words that are supposed to be appearing, if those are supposed to be from an ancient prophet that was also that made its way into the collection of books that made up the Bible, that seems a little bit sus so far. Anything you want to comment on that?
It seems okay. So the apologist response to the 1769 King James Version is that, hey, Joseph Smith and his scribes, why wouldn't they save time? If they're going to simply write down Isaiah, why not just carry it over from the edition that Joseph Smith has handy? That's their explanation. The trouble with that, Kara, is that In other places, it is super important that Joseph Smith not carry things over, right? So
Right.
when God is talking to him, I'm trying to think offhand of the best way to explain this. There are other places in Joseph Smith's translation production, such as the Inspired Bible, where God goes like, hey, that Bible you have, like, that's not good enough. It's corrupted.
Right.
We need to correct it. And it seems strange that on the front end, Joseph Smith isn't told by God that he needs to do something very similar with the Book of Mormon. Like, why carry errors over in one translation, and then in another translation, it's super important that you correct a corrupted text?
And
That's
yeah.
it's a counter argument.
And you know what the literal apologist answer to that is that God just wanted him to use something that was more familiar to him in the way that he spoke. You know what? I was like, yeah, of course he wanted them. Of course he's going to use what's only familiar to him as the one that has corruption. Why doesn't he just go straight to the source? Like if he's going to have to pick one, like reading off of the rock that's apparently coming from God beaming it onto this rock, as opposed to like, yeah, of course he's more comfortable stealing it and making people think like, yeah, did you know that I actually been talking to the ancient prophets are actually in my book. That same thing that's in the Bible, it's in this book. They're going to go hand in hand. They're going to be snuggle buddies. And then
it reminds me when the apologist, again, we talked about this, you said like there's a giant pile of shit in the room and they just want to work with one turd at a time, right? And the idea is that like sometimes I'm going to use the argument that it's a loose translation. That's really important in some places, because if it's a tight translation, we can't explain the word horses in the Book of Mormon, for instance. And so in other places, we need it to be a tight translation. Nephi is an Egyptian word. We have to know he's using the word Nephi. The bouncing around between one sort of logic for an explanation in one place and another sort of logic in another place. And again, the idea of using 1769 errors in one instance, and in the other instance saying like there's errors there, it's corrupted, we need to fix it, we can't allow it to stand. Those two bump into each other.
Perfectly said. And I when I was leaving the church and I always heard, people talking about this as a problem, I never really understood like what passage of the Bible are they talking about? Which ancient prophet was writing these verses that were written into the golden plates that were supposed to be, taken to the Americas then. So I want to make sure that this does not go misunderstood, how important this is to Joseph's narrative about the miraculous beginnings of the Book of Mormon. So from the Wikipedia on the King James Version being in the Book of Mormon, it says, adherents of the Latter-day Saint movement generally believe the Book of Mormon has miraculous origin. While Joseph Smith described the Book of Mormon as a translation, that's important, of text written on golden plates, Smith had not studied ancient languages and did not translate in the traditional sense of the word. Another great theme, like you're saying, they'll use whatever word, they'll use whatever, apologist spin that they want to use. So the word translation doesn't mean what it used to mean anymore, kids. Anyway, Smith claimed a divine origin for his ability to translate. The existence of biblical passages in the Book of Mormon is explained in the text as being the result of Lehi's family. So Lehi, if you guys don't know, prophet in the Book of Mormon, kind of how the Book of Mormon starts. Nephi, being born of goodly parents. His parent is Lehi. Lehi. Result of Lehi's family bringing with them a set of brass plates from Jerusalem, which containing the writings of Moses, Isaiah, and several prophets not mentioned in the Bible. Regarding this record, 1 Nephi 5:11 states, and he beheld that he did contain the 5 books of Moses, which gave an account of the creation of the world and also of Adam and Eve, who were our first parents. While most contemporary secular and religious biblical scholars date the completion of the Pentateuch, how do you pronounce that?
Pentateuch?
Pentateuch, I was off. I thought Tuch. I was wrong. To earlier than the Persian period, 538 to 323 BC. Those who accept the miraculous origin story generally subscribe to the tradition of Mosaic authorship circa 1280 BC. Suspicious?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that you're carrying errors over that are only in that 1769 edition, that's striking. What you just said is striking. When you add to it the idea that there are parts of 3rd Isaiah that are in the Book of Mormon, which biblical scholars say absolutely shouldn't be there. It was written long after the brass plates would have come over here from Laban. When you add to it that there's a part where Mormon in chapter 9 quotes Mark chapter 16, which wasn't written, like Mark ends before the ending that we see in the New Testament. That book cuts off when the tomb is empty. And then what comes after, Joseph Smith puts in the Book of Mormon. It shouldn't be there. There are lots of other issues that, again, we can touch on them today, but it isn't just a matter of like, oh, there's some 1769 errors carried over. It's that the way Joseph Smith implemented the New Testament and the Old Testament into the Book of Mormon is layers and layers of being problematic.
Exactly. And again, I don't fault our, our ancestors or grandparents for joining the church because they had some good feelings and they had a good community. But is it actually a true thing? When July 12th at 3 a.m, I said, oh, it's not a true thing. I'm going to have to sort out what that means now. It's just not a true thing. So it's hard, yes, to know all of these different places and draw from all these sources. That's why this video is so great, and you should like and share it, because hopefully we're putting as much of this evidence right in one smacking video as I can. Thanks, Casey Jude. I will put up any compliments because I am so tired from working on this. Love listening to Kara deconstruct. She knows her shit, unless it was a sarcastic one, but I don't think it is. Anyone with a flower on there is a friend of mine. Okay, so the next thing I want to introduce is, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. Mike from LDS Discussions already has so many amazing videos on Mormon stories right now, breaking down some really important things. So I'm just going to let Mike from LDS Discussions talk about the problems that this has for Mormonism's truth claims. Okay.
Episodes as well.
All right. So the next slide, it asks the question, why the King James Bible presents problems for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, and this is just, again, it looks at some of the areas we've kind of covered a little bit. So there are certain things that the King James Bible is going to do for the Book of Mormon that is really going to kind of present issues, such as the bottom line is it's anachronistic to be in the Book of Mormon because of the fact that this translation was not done until 1611, which means that it is not an ancient translation. It's a more modern translation that is not going to be accessible to the Book of Mormon people. And that becomes problematic when there are certain phrases and wordings that are unique to the King James Bible that are going to work their way into the Book of Mormon. And one of the bigger things, and this is one that is kind of was interesting to me when I kind of stopped privileging the King James Bible, is the translation of the King James Bible is not considered to be one of the most accurate, and is actually considered an inferior translation to the more commonly used translations today, the NIV, the NASB. Those are different translations that are more commonly used now, because the King James Bible obviously was done, by scholars at the time. But it was done without maybe some of the I think it was done before the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it's not going to have as much.
I just want to note before you can, I want to note, why might it be important for the LDS Church to give preference to and priority to the King James Bible as the most, outside of Joseph Smith's inspired Bible translation, the most useful translation of the Bible to use? And it's because they don't want believing Mormons. They don't want believing Mormons to deal with another translation that comes across more accurately, because it's going to open up another can of worms.
That is so, I've never thought of that. That is so true. Because, you go to a different Christian church and they'll have all different kinds of translations of the Bible. And I'm like, why do we have to hold to that one so strictly?
Right. The King James Bible in Bible translations is considered like trash. It's like the lowest of the low, to the point. But Mormonism holds the King James Bible up as the best of the best. And note why that might be. Anyway. My
two favorite evidences that are not the typical ones that Mormonism is not true is, one, what you just said, that like, if biblical scholars are disagreeing with you and they hold it as very low, but yours holds it as very high, that is so obvious. And then in that same vein, the idea that everything that the church basically teaches goes against like modern best practices for like psychological practices on mental health and things like that.
Like women
literally
being raped
the
and
worst.
losing their virtue. Right. Sure.
That and oh so much more, right? Like they're always on like the opposite side of what the best institutions
Elder
for
Holland was right.
science and progress. I know, like the things that they admit. It's hilarious. All right. Back to putting this on the screen.
Keep it going.
As much of the earlier texts that some of them have. And so that is, you know, the Book of Mormon Church in a lot of ways is dated because of the fact that we still use the King James Bible in it. But most churches today would not use it just because they don't consider it to be nearly as good and as accurate. The King James Bible obviously includes the New Testament. I mean, because it is the Bible, but that should not be in the Book of Mormon. We've covered that in the anachronism episode, but we'll cover that a little bit more here as to why that presents issues. And one final thing is just to say, going back almost to the early episodes, using the King James Bible in the Book of Mormon goes directly against the witness accounts of the Tight Translation, which is to say, we are told that the rock in the hat gives exact words that will not change until they're written down. Yet here we're basically going to show that, and we've shown in previous episodes too, that the King James Bible is used, all over the place in the Book of Mormon, which tells us that either God is presenting the King James Bible through the rock in the hat, or Joseph Smith is using the Bible to pull in phrases and even big chapters of Isaiah. And that presents an issue when you look at the accounts that are given by the witnesses to the process.
All right. That's a wonderful overview. And are you saying that all of these bullets are going to be covered in today's episode?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's jump in.
That's the end of the clip I wanted.
Yep. And so
with mistranslation.
Is there anything you want to add there? I just wanted to play the rest of this clip.
Just as the apologist earlier was saying that we don't have any evidence that that Joseph Smith would have used the late war. Notice when it's convenient for Joseph Smith to have access to other books, such as the 1769 edition of the King James Bible directly involved in the translation. Notice then apologists make space for books to be in the room that none of the scribes record evidence that happened.
Yeah, I also thought that was really interesting. I love listening to apologists spin like that. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
And the other idea is just that, like, would they really have been that suspicious if he had a Bible open while he was translating, from his rock in his hat, with the curtain up or whatever? Would they really have been like, is that big of a problem if you're getting words from God one way or the other? So
of the King James Version that end up in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, and this is one we really haven't talked about too much. And so the King James Bible has errors in the translation, which is going to happen anytime you're translating an ancient text into a different language, especially one of this length. But the problem is those errors should not appear in the Book of Mormon, given that Joseph Smith is claiming to be receiving translation of a different source that is not the KJV through the gift and power of God. These errors being in the Book of Mormon are going to leave fingerprints as to how they got there, and then that allows you to understand who brought them into it. And so these are errors that maybe wouldn't seem like huge deals, but they do allow us from a textual standpoint to understand how they got there and when they were put there and who would have put them in there.
Okay, so just to restate what I think I heard you say is that the King James Bible has errors in it, and the version of the King James Bible that Joseph Smith would have used would have contained some of those errors.
Yep.
And magically those are appearing in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so you're going to give us some examples of that now.
Yeah, and so this is just a really quick one, which is a good one because...
is there anything you want to add quickly before he goes through his examples? I just wanted to say that the way that apologists try to spin this, like we were mentioning earlier, is they're like, well, Joseph just was using things that were, more accessible to him in his day. And God said, just use, this is the same exact thing, just, write this in there. And I think Bill and we already made our points on why would God ask Joseph Smith to use a really poorly translated version of the Bible to get his most authentic word across, to be the most true book that's ever been produced, the keystone of his religion.
The most correct book on earth.
Yeah, the most correct book on earth. I think that point's already been made, but I just wanted to make sure to double down on that. And then furthermore, I'm thinking about the way that people are converted, the way that people read the Book of Mormon, the way that people are understanding it. It's like I said when I was reading that Wikipedia article, it is that these are ancient prophets who are writing these on the brass plates that were taken by Lehi's family over to the Americas all compiled into the Book of Mormon for Joseph Smith to translate those, whether he's writing his fingers on the plates or getting them through a rock and a hat, whatever that means. Like the understanding of where these passages are that you're reading are supposed to develop your testimony for the prophet that he is in tune with these other ancient prophets. It's all just a mirage, though. To me, it's all just a mirage. It's all just like a magic show of making him look very prophetic, making him look like he's in tune with these ancient prophets. He's got this miraculous book, this miraculous gift, and still quoting things that will match up and line up perfectly with the Bible that it was around in his day. Probably didn't expect the church to be around for 200 years to be able to see through those lies. But no matter how the apologists spin it is all my point. No matter how they spin it, you have to admit that the way that the Book of Mormon is understood by the general membership of the church and anyone that they might go convert is not this new apologist spin and argument of, yeah, he just like kind of wrote what he was looking at and put it in there. They never admit that to a missionary discussion, you know?
Yeah, and sort of along the same lines, notice how every translation production of Joseph Smith is explained differently, right? Like the Book of Mormon translation is a certain kind of translation according to the church and its apologists.
Yes.
The Book of Abraham translation is a sort of kind of different translation than the Book of Mormon according to the church and according to the apologists. The Book of Moses translation is different than the other two, according to the church and according to the apologists, because in every instance, the evidence is different in terms of what the critic poses to show that it's a fraud, and the church and its apologists come forth and go like, oh, well, this must be what's happening because that explains this. And what's the chances that God chose to use multiple translation methods with a farm boy in New York who couldn't translate anything anyway? Like, there's no consistency according to the apologists and the church and what this translation process looked like from book to book to book. Book of Moses, inspired Bible, Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon, Kinderhook plates.
Occam's razor, was he just remixing it and making it up? Or is God just like really fickle? And he's like, I liked the rock in the hat thing when you were looking up like, you know, buried treasure and stuff. Use that again. Okay, never mind. Ditch that one.
Yeah, don't use
I got
anything.
some papyrus for you.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, papyrus, you know what? You're like messing up the phallic symbols. Let me try something else. Just like let me beam it down to your head. Let me beam it down to your head. Like every single different. I threw my pen across the room. I got so excited. Just like God, you know, throwing floodwaters down to his children. That's why I'm trying to impersonate wrath right now. So yeah, just the God is not supposed to be a God of confusion. Another great shelf-breaking moment. Like,
yeah. To the very point where the Kinderhook plates, the best explanation the apologist has is that Joseph Smith, for the first time in his life, is actually trying to do a real secular translation, because that's the best way to explain the evidence for them and stay faithful. It gets strange. Again, at the end of the day, you have to, if you're going to be rational, you have to choose the explanation and conclusion that matches the data best with the least amount of conjecture and allowances.
And to also add your point to mine, the explanation that is God a God of confusion? Is God the type of God that sets up this church for less than 1% of 1% of 1% of all of his children who have ever lived to be able to understand it? And then when technology advances to the point where the evidence is irrefutable that his one true church looks a lot like a fraud, looks a lot like those other churches that are made up, what are his best and brightest? What do they have to say about it? Are they covering it up? Are they spinning things? Are they engaging in like horrendous logical fallacies that you would never put up with if it was a Jehovah's Witness knocking at your door? Yeah. What is the most likely thing to conclude? All right, let me play this. I just want Mike to kind of explain an example. I had never personally spent the time really looking at a lot of these examples, so pay attention. I hope this is interesting to you guys.
If you look at Isaiah 2:16 in the NRSV, it says, against all the ships of Tarshish and against all the beautiful craft. And then in Isaiah in the King James Bible, it says, and upon all the ships of Tarshish and upon all the pleasant pictures. And then in 2nd Nephi, it says, and upon all the ships of the sea and upon all the ships of Tarshish and upon all pleasant pictures. And we have a write-up on this overview page on ldsdiscussions.com, and we're borrowing from a write-up that explains this particular error. And what they say is, one of the reasons I like this example is because it's a twofer. In the same verse, we have the Book of Mormon preserving a KJV mistranslation while introducing a new redaction. It's difficult to argue that God is simply transmitting the KJV to Joseph, errors and all, when in the very same verse, Joseph is going to make another incorrect redaction. And if you look at our overview page, we have some links to kind of show why they consider this an incorrect redaction. And then they say another reason I like it is because the source of the mistranslation is clear, meaning that we know he's pulling directly from the KJV. And the implication would be that there was no Egyptian loanword that could be shifted from it. So,
really quickly, for those who just heard a bunch of words but didn't actually,
I think we understand what he's saying there.
Isn't it weird how God lets these kinds of errors get into the Book of Mormon, but he's bothered by other errors?
Yeah, and to be honest, I was always excited that to read like the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, because you do hear so much about how like, yeah, you can't trust the Bible. That's why we need a restoration. That's why, we need further light and knowledge.
Yeah.
And the Bible, if Joseph Smith was really going to attack it, he should be like rewriting the shit out of that thing. And then furthermore, he's not only not doing that very well with Adam Clark's Bible commentary, ripping that off when he's supposed to be a prophet, but then he's also, putting direct things that were just they didn't have the further light and knowledge. They didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls at the point in time where Joseph was copying these things, and the version that he's copying from has just got so many errors that just tells you God really wants his kids to be confused, I guess.
Yeah, it is strange.
It is strange. Anything else you want to say there before we move on?
No, just the one you just had up on the screen that they pointed out
as well.
That KJV one with the pictures versus the beautiful craft. And again, you can see why they would want you to use the King James Bible rather than other translations, because then those errors would be much more apparent.
Mm-hmm. Dun, dun, dun. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm on the right slide.
Future episodes as well.
All right. So the next slide.
Right, I think I already played that one. It's my first time using Google Slides, so everyone go easy on me, said Adele. So another quick examples, I'm really trying to lay it on thick here with evidence, you guys. So the KJV is a source for the Book of Mormon. This is from Wikipedia. Among critics of the Book of Mormon who reject Joseph Smith's explanation for the origins of the text, raise your hand if you're one of them. Some argue that the KJV was a significant source for the Book of Mormon text. The Book of Mormon explicitly quotes the prophet Isaiah, containing 19 chapters of the KJV of Isaiah in their entirety, along with parts of a few other chapters. In total, approximately 30% of the book of Isaiah is quoted in the Book of Mormon. One source counts 478 verses in the Book of Mormon, which are quoted from Isaiah. The Book of Mormon also quotes from the KJV of other books. So you have 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, which says, charity suffereth long and is kind, charity evileth not. It's like that whole thing about hopeth, endureth all things. Moroni, then from the Book of Mormon, says, and charity suffereth long and is kind and envieth not. And did I say evileth not? Wow. I'm reading on a very small screen, sorry. Envieth not and is not puffed up, seeketh not her own, and is not easily provoked. And just basically mirrors word for word. The Book of Mormon contains a version of the Sermon on the Mount, which some authors have claimed to be the Achilles heel of the Book of Mormon, end quote. One author makes the point that certain portions of the Greek manuscripts of Matthew 5-7 do not agree with the KJV of the text, and concludes that the Book of Mormon version of the sermon should not contain text similar to the KJV. Bum, bum, bum.
Notice, what you got on the screen. So notice, again, Lehi and Nephi and their family, Nephi, Lehi and their family, build a boat, come over here. They get the brass plates from Laban, bring them over, and they have a certain record that dates from the moment they got those plates and before. And then notice somehow how the New Testament makes its way into the Book of Mormon. And so again, they have to go back to the same logic that they used with Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, where they have to say, look, God works in mysterious ways. he gave the same scripture to both authors, and that hence they're both just writing down the same thing. It's just a sacred coincidence, basically. And the reality is that Moroni has no business having First Corinthians inside of his text.
No
It
business.
wouldn't be on the brass plate. So now you have to make allowances. And allowances, yeah, but maybe God gave. And anytime you use maybe, what if, it's possible, you're adding conjecture, you're adding allowances. So when you say like, hey, maybe Moroni and First Corinthians, those authors both got the same revelation, it's much more likely that Joseph Smith is plagiarizing the New Testament.
Exactly. And if you guys remember, I had another really popular live stream I did with Bill back in May about the top absurdities of Mormonism that people just don't talk about often. And that was a really fun video that we did together, and a really popular one. And the overarching theme is taken from a podcast that Bill did about like what is the most logical thing to conclude with the least amount of conjecture. And this falls along with all of these absurdities that you're just kind of supposed to just float out in the air. And then Mormonism, as a high demand fundamentalist religion, like a lot of them, you're going to have thought stopping techniques and cliches that the organization is going to employ. And so when you're feeling like, okay, I'm going to go with the more faithful answer, because then I'll at least find out in the next life, and I'm going to go with the one that makes me feel the best, or I'm going to, God has mysteries to test us, but God has mysteries to test the Jehovah's Witnesses, and he has mysteries to test, Jim Jones's friends, like once you allow for those types of cliches to be used that ignore the actual evidence for what feels good and what is used over and over again in these organizations. You're kidding yourself if you think that your organization is the single one that's allowed to do it. Your organization is the one that's allowed to have conjecture. The other ones aren't. Those are the false ones. Mine are, though.
Yeah. In my religion, Satan's trying to trick me into not believing in my church. But in your religion, the evidence is so strong that your church isn't true. And just another note too, it's not just that First Corinthians one that you had up on the screen. It's also First Corinthians chapter 12, 5 through 11 versus Moroni chapter 10, 8 through 14 and 16 and 17. Yep. So it's that one also. And so when you look at in AD 54 versus AD 421, and Joseph Smith is almost plagiarizing the entire sermon. That to me is overwhelming. And again, the easiest explanation with the least amount of allowances and conjecture is that Joseph Smith is plagiarizing the New Testament and putting it into the fictional character's voice of the Book of Mormon authors.
Bam. Thank you so much for finding that. That's such I don't know how else to say it, just a slam dunk point. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, it is a slam dunk point all by itself. And now we've added a bunch more.
Yeah, this is fun making this whole presentation, collecting all of these things. And I just knew that I was like, I just got to have Bill come on here and just add to it. And I love the way your brain thinks. Thank you for adding that. Cool. So I want to add back onto my screen the apologist responses to the KJV we kind of got into already. And I just want to make sure that if there was any stone unturned, I went to debunkingcesletter.com and read everything that they have to say. And again, it's like the pit stop when you're on your way out trying to look for honest answers. And you're like, this is the best you can do. So I just wanted to read what their response was to why the KJV is in the Book of Mormon so much. And one thing that they say is there are numerous accounts by those involved in the translation that say Joseph didn't access any manuscripts. So how do we reconcile those accounts with the clear examples of KJV in the Book of Mormon? It's hard to know, but it seems as if they might have been wrong. Some have sought to reconcile the statements by speculating that God might have touched Joseph's memory to share the KJV passages that he had once read. Perhaps it's all conjecture. Perhaps indeed. There's some debate about a tight versus loose translation. Those arguing for a tight translation often look at two Book of Mormon witness statements, in particular, David Whitner and Martin Harris. More details coming at the bottom. Yeah, I should hope your argument's more sound than that. And then they go on to say, unless there's anything you want to add to that before I read the next slide of what they say.
No.
Okay. Oh, the jokes write themselves sometimes. So their debunking reply goes on to say, KJV verses only account for 2% of the Book of Mormon. It's only 2%.
Don't worry about it.
It's likely Joseph felt that, I mean, polygamy was only 2% of all of the, Mormons. That's not we're not interested in like the number per se. We're interested in like the reasons behind that number even being there.
What's the
It's so out of
repercussions
place.
it has? Yeah.
Yeah. It's likely Joseph felt that the KJV wording significantly conveyed the messages of those passages that he encountered while translating. So it's crystal clear that there are word-for-word passages from the King James Version of the Bible found in the Book of Mormon. Again, this is apologists saying this, not me. LDS scholars have been saying this for years. The critics say that Joseph Smith just plagiarized, but why would he do this? Was Joseph an idiot? Did he think anybody would notice that entire chapters of 2nd Nephi 12 through 24 nearly mirrored Isaiah 2 through 14? That's highly unlikely. Most critics don't argue that Joseph was an idiot. Instead, they often make the point that he was super intelligent and able to craft the book on his own. Was he trying to expand the length of the Book of Mormon? It doesn't hold either way because there's only 2% of the Book of Mormon. The likely reason is because those KJV passages best conveyed the message that he encountered during the translation process. And I would just like to say from my own voice, the message that he was trying to convey is that he was a prophet and he had never had an ego death, and he's going to do whatever the crap he wants with the book that he wants to say because he's the one writing it. It's from God. What's he trying to convey during the translation process? That he's a prophet and he's in touch with, ancient angels, ancient spirits, ancient texts. But give me your reaction though, Bill.
It seems strange in one account that God wanted to save Joseph Smith time and did so by allowing lots of errors to get into the final translation. And in other instances, getting the translation so right and getting rid of the errors is so important that God has Joseph Smith spend an immense amount of time retranslating the Bible.
Well said. So, was he an idiot? Like nobody would notice that he put those in there? What would you say to why Joseph Smith used the writings from these ancient? Why was he putting that in there in the first place? If he was, wouldn't people just know when the jig be up?
Yeah, I think from the moment. So first off, it took what 4 or 5 years, 5 years, I think, from the original visit of Moroni to finally even get the plates, right? So Joseph had to keep kicking the can down the street every year, which buys him more time. So maybe he thought it would be a very simple project. He gets himself into it and he realizes this is way more difficult than he thought it was going to be. So he buys himself time by every September 21st, kicking the can to the next September of the following year. Then the 116 pages happen. They get lost. Suddenly Joseph has more time to think it through and replan it out. This idea that Joseph Smith, like he's just flying by the seat of his pants, he did all this in 90 days. Wow, it's miraculous. It really neglects all the time that Joseph Smith puts out that he's going to be doing this work. Meanwhile, he constantly has to push back the deadline of when the work actually gets done.
Oh man, perfectly said. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. This is another clip of Mike from LDS Discussions. I titled it, Joseph's copy of the KJV, all up in the Book of Mormon.
Good one, because if you look at Isaiah 2:16 in the NRSV, it says, against all the ships of Tarshish and against all the beautiful craft. And then in Isaiah in the King James Bible, it says, and upon all the ships of Tarshish and upon all the pleasant pictures.
Oh, yeah.
And then in 2nd Nephi.
Did we already watch this one, right?
I think we did that one. Yep. I think we're on the next one.
Beautiful. Thanks. I did it twice. Again, I was up till 1 a.m. I was getting a little...
Good one, because if you look at Isaiah...
I'm so sorry. Audio listeners, please bear with me. Yeah, I'm going to move on to Grant Palmer talking again about some more of the things that he thinks are important. And if you've never heard some of these things, I'm going to be playing a lot of clips. And I know the tendency is like, to zone out. Please don't. I never heard this King Benjamin story before I was researching this yesterday. So I think this is another really important one.
in Jacob, Enos, Mosiah, and Alma up to chapter 42. Those 11 preachers sound just like what he would have heard in his own environment when he went to revivals, and especially Methodist, which he was somewhat partial to. And you will see the four-step conversion pattern of his era. You will see the same phraseology of the Bible, the King James Bible. You will see frontier rhetoric. You will see the same pattern from A to Z. And you can check this. This is not a theory. Let me give you one example of those 12. King Benjamin. King Benjamin, I found, were 1 mile from Palmyra on June 6, 1826, a very formative time in Joseph Smith's life. This is in my chapter 4, all of this stuff about the 11 preachers. 1 mile from his home. He said he went as often as he could get there. I think he was at this one, and I'll tell you why. It's in my book, but I'll tell you anyway. What the Methodists like to do is to consecrate the ground of a revival area. 1 mile from Palmyra, June 6, 1826. 15 months before Joseph gets the golden plates. The famous Methodist prelate named Bishop McKendry is going to give his last discourse. And he's weak, and he is feeble, and he is beloved, and he is going to give a talk on personal salvation. And everybody on the ground makes a commitment to Christ except little children. That sound familiar? If it doesn't, I'll keep going. 10,000 people were there. The whole Ontario district was coming to honor this sainted man. And they built a little pulpit. And one of the ministers would sit up there by the name of Benjamin G. Paddock is on that stand. And they put the tents around that stand. And he gives this discourse, and people are falling down. They're moved emotionally, just like King Benjamin's speech. We call that the falling exercise in the Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening. And you come away from that, and I found every source I could who touched on that revival of June 6, 1826. And I've got them all documented in there in the book in chapter 4. That's one example of the 11.
Yeah, that is just so fascinating. And again, it's like, was Joseph Smith stupid? If he was really stealing that from like the revivals in his period, wouldn't he have changed the names? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that he was really interested in changing the names as much as he was just interested in telling like a compelling story from things that he thought was interesting that were happening in his time period that he thought would make, a little bit of a compelling book. It's still a snooze fest, but...
Yeah, and just to note too, I went to the Church History Library in 2013. I went out to Salt Lake City for the Fair Mormon Conference from Ohio. And
do you want me to share your screen, Bill?
You can if you want to, because there's something I can pull up there. Okay. So this is the thing that Grant Palmer there was talking about. This is King Benjamin's address. But in 2013, I went out to the Church History Library, and Brian Whitney, who was kind of an assistant out there for a little while he was going to school. And his job was to go through these old books of ministers and pick out their sermons and make note of any coincidences. And he was quite surprised that there was a lot of correlation between the sermons of Joseph Smith's day with the theology of the Book of Mormon, to the point where, just like this King Benjamin one, which is on the screen right now, there's also Richard Bushman, scholar of the church, former stake president, patriarch, but I think he's like an emeritus patriarch now because he moved. There is phrasing everywhere, long phrases that if you will Google them, you will find them in 19th century writings. The theology of the Book of Mormon is very much 19th century theology, and it reads like a 19th century understanding of the Hebrew Bible as an Old Testament. That's a believing scholar of the church who knows as much about Joseph Smith as anyone on the inside of the church. So again, you can argue it. If you're a believer, you go, come on, that's not real. It is real. The phraseology, the vernacular, the rhetoric of the Book of Mormon is very much a 19th century product.
Yeah, and then you add to that Greg Prince's quote about how there's not a single doctrine from the original church that hasn't gone unchanged. Like, sounds like somebody who was borrowing things from that century, and then as those centuries progressed, things came a changing as well. Beautiful. All right, let me finish. I'm gonna play a little bit more of good old Grant Palmer. What is this? Oh, I gotta add it to the stream. There we go.
The 11 preachers. Now, they're not all that detailed, but they're following the conversion pattern, the phraseology. Everything is the same. And you come away and say, do I really think that falling exercise happened in ancient America among all that shrubbery? In ancient America? No. This has come down from the Reformation. And this is what you've got. It is very, very hard to explain that away. And then Benjamin, when he sees a person who's in the falling exercise or emotionally affected, they call that being under conviction, and they bring him up to the altar. That's the little bench in front of the stand. They call it the altar of God. And those are the phrases that are used by Benjamin in the Book of Mormon. And after the thing is over and they've all made a covenant to Christ, having heard this sainted man, this feeble last discourse, they appoint the stations of the preachers. And that phrase is in there too. That is a Methodist term. And yet the people at BYU says he went word for word and translated out of that stone. Well, all right.
Yeah, and I mean, I've made some videos with John DeLand. One of my most popular TikTok videos that we made was about, top 15 things Mormon missionaries will not tell you about Joseph Smith. And one of the big hitters on that list, in my opinion, is that the Book of Mormon is just littered with, like that 1800s style Christian Protestantism, heavy anti-Catholic sentiments, things that were just very reflective of Joseph's milieu. Again, people baptizing in the name of Jesus Christ, and these sermons that just sound similar to evangelical sermons today that were apparently there amongst the ancient Americans, these ancient inhabitants, the Native Americans, with absolutely no linguistics evidence tying how they speak today in their different tribes back to the language that would have been used then. But what we do have is a lot of what was spoken in Joseph Smith's day, kind of retrofitted onto what he thought maybe they were talking of, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's way too suspicious. You cannot smooth over that. It's obviously at this point Joseph's milieu. But what do you want to say, Bill?
Will you put my screen back up for just a second? This is a depiction of a 1800s Methodist camp meeting. Notice the tents in the background. Again, as Grant Palmer's pointing out, they would pitch their tents. They would have them face the speakers, and the families would gather in their tents. The idea of what King Benjamin carried out very much has deep similarities to the way these revivals and these camp meetings would happen. They were called a camp meeting because people were camping. That's the whole idea. Book of Mormon is very much, and let me say this too. It's one thing to go hey, everybody, for everyone who's a believer, we can clearly show that this is where Joseph Smith got his material. We can even weaken it more than that. If the secular explanation for Joseph Smith is of equal value as supernatural God magic, the most rational conclusion is to go with the secular explanation. So if you go, look, I believe the Book of Mormon, no matter what you guys say, when we provide explanations that explain what's in the Book of Mormon without using any supernatural God magic, and it's of equal value to your reason for why you believe that there is supernatural God magic and your church is true, I'm just telling you, outside of your own brain, everyone else is going to choose to believe the most rational conclusion, which is this is where Joseph Smith got his material from, that camp meeting process and how that thing looked.
Yes, everyone else is going to be led away by Satan, but you've got the right idea, don't you?
You got it. You nailed it. You were a lucky one. Everyone else on the planet Earth struck out, but you just happened to be born in Kaysville. Nailed
Kaysville
it.
represent. Kaysville don't represent, actually. Also, audience, will you tell me if Bill's video is lagged? Because it's lagging really bad on my end. I just want to make sure if there's anything you can do to up your Wi-Fi, or maybe it's only my
Wi-Fi is really good.
I believe you. So
400 up or something, and
all right,
150 down, something like that.
That was insensitive, as you're like a professional.
I'm
live
sorry,
streamer.
I don't know what your Wi-Fi is.
It says it's like I've got full bars, but I just.
Jamie says it's lagging too. I'm to blame.
Oh, interesting. Maybe it goes through my internet. Maybe it goes through my internet, and then
I'll take this. The most rational explanation is that it's mine.
No, the most rational explanation is the one who's not a professional live streamer, but hopes to be. If you can go to Donor Box and just believe in me that I can pump out amazing content for this community, and the money will be there and available to me. I love that. Mucho Lago. Damn. I wonder what that is from. Oh well. As long as you can hear him, as long as everyone is just,
I can turn off my camera too at points if you need me to.
Never. We'll keep proceeding, and let me see if there's anything else I wanted to see in this Grant Palmer video.
So that's 1st and 2nd Nephi. That's Jacob, Enos, Mosiah, Alma 1 through 42. Alma 43 through 63 is the war chapters. And I believe Tom Donifro has written something on that. And I think these chapters reflect the war strategies of the American Indian Wars, and especially the War of 1812, and British Indian fighting strategies against Colonel Jackson. Helaman 1 through 7 is about Ghanaianism, and this is 1828-9, and Andrew Jackson's running for president, and he's a Mason, and boy are they vilifying him. They're speculating what General Jackson will do if he's president to the executive branch of government and the judicial. You see the same phrases in those chapters. You see the same plans and designs and speculations. The Smiths had read a newspaper. They took a newspaper. They can read. All right, 3rd Nephi 11 through 28. That's the ministry of Jesus in the New World. According to
let me pause it there real quick. Just adding to the overall argument that there's things that are in Joseph's milieu again. These secret combinations, these anti-Mason sentiments, these obviously you've got some heavy racist sentiments in there too. That the most logical explanation is that these are the stories that are important to the people, that he knows that they're going to connect with these stories. They're going to see similar themes and be all the more interested in his really special book, as opposed to maybe like writing the book like I was told it was written for me, and like it's written for our generation in like 2007 or whatever. It feels quite the opposite. Do you have any other comments on that, Bill?
He mentioned 3rd Nephi. I mean, you have the voice of Jesus the day before he's born being heard by the people. It just, there's these things that stretch the mind, and how all these miracles work. And of course, the apologetic answer is always that with God, all things are possible. But recognize that anytime you say with God, all things are possible, you are in fact adding additional conjecture. So yeah. Anyway.
I wasn't planning on you not ranting for very long.
I'm sorry.
I am but a simple woman who does not do illegal things on her live streams. Beautiful. Let me add back. Let's keep going and see what else he has to say.
According to the Book of Mormon, in those chapters, there are 490 verses. 50% come right out of the King James Bible of 1769. 50%. You can recognize the phrases or whole passages or whole chapters. Ether. This gets a little more speculative, but I think it's what.
And I think that's where I wanted to leave it off. Yeah, isn't that fascinating that there's, 50% of just Jesus's ministry is stuff that he already said in his other previous ministry. And I think we already made the point that it's really suspicious that it's in there word for word, ain't it?
It is. We mentioned Mark, the end of the book of Mark in the New Testament being in the Book of Mormon when it was written long after the Bible was actually originally written by whoever the author of Mark was. But we find the same problem. We mentioned it earlier with Third Isaiah. So biblical scholars say, look, what presents itself as the entire book of Isaiah is actually three different authors. First Isaiah, this time frame, second Isaiah, this, third Isaiah here. And they know that because of the way the history is told doesn't coincide with the timeline. And some of the things that are reported seem to have happened after the original author Isaiah is alleged to have written his book. And so in the Book of Mormon, third Isaiah is present, and it shouldn't be there. It's written by an author who's not Isaiah, and it's written time-wise long after Lehi and his family would have left Jerusalem. It shouldn't be in the book. So as he's mentioning use of the King James Bible, again, I just want to note third Isaiah shouldn't be there, and there's at least one chapter in the Book of Mormon that is part of that third Isaiah authorship.
Yes. Thank you for explaining that better.
Yep.
And then another point that he wants to make is about where he got the Book of Abraham from.
Organization like Farms, it says, well, there's 25% of the Book of Mormon. We don't know where it came from. Therefore, it's probably still ancient. That's the wrong end of the elephant. Because those 6 sources that I just cited in here, within this, and you can get it online, 75% of the Book of Mormon comes right out of Joseph Smith's environment. The King James Bible, the Methodist revivals, Smith family biographical materials, the war strategies, and anti-Masonry. And they say, well, they're going to focus on that 25% that we do not yet know where it came from. But if you're going to make a case for an ancient Book of Mormon people and an ancient record, you better not have 75% of it coming out of his environment, his own backyard. This is not rocket science. This is easy. All right. Let's just.
I can't say it better than that.
Yeah, I was trying to find another spot here, but it goes beyond this. So in the Book of Moses, and I don't have I was trying to find my email from yesterday that I sent myself. Let me see if I can locate it.
Do you need another minute?
Really...
I can rant for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
And by rant, I mean let Grant Palmer say it better than I ever could.
Just go over a couple of more and then we'll.
I'm just not sure if I played everything I wanted to in here.
We could do the same thing to the Book of Abraham. 4 sources, really quick. Chapter 1 comes right out of Josephus. Joseph Smith family owned a copy of Josephus, an 1830 edition, or copy. Chapters 2, 4, and 5, 88% of those verses come right out of the King James Bible, including those errors. Chapter 3, Thomas Dick's Philosophy of a Future State. That's where he's getting his astronomy. Joseph Smith owns a copy of Thomas Dick's Philosophy of a Future State. Thomas Taylor, his 1816 book on the 6 books of Proclus on the theology of Plato, tells you all about that facsimile too. There are 5 or 6 phrases in there that are right in that facsimile. And so it goes. You can find 100% of the motifs in the Book of Abraham in those 4 sources. And if you throw in the Hebrew names that Joseph learned from Joshua Sextus in the winter of 35 and 36, That pretty well accounts for the names.
Did you find what you wanted to say yet?
Yeah, if you want to throw my screen up for just a second, and I'll highlight it here. But the Book of Moses, in the same order, Moses 1:1 correlates to Matthew 4:8. This is the Book of Moses, which is an inspired translation by Joseph Smith. He did this about the same time he did the Book of Abraham. There wasn't any papyri or any text that he was using. But again, Moses is an Old Testament prophet, but Joseph Smith uses the story of Jesus in Matthew and Luke in order to fill the material. So Moses 1:1, it correlates to Matthew 4:8, Moses 1:12, Matthew 4:9, 15:9, Moses 1:15, Matthew 4:9, Moses 1:17, Matthew 4:9, so on and so forth. And it gives you each of the things. And I put it in our private chat. I put that large block there. If you wanted to put that in the comments for people, they could go do their own research. But you'll notice that the New Testament story of Jesus is extremely similar to the Joseph Smith production of the Book of Moses, to the point where most scholars who deal with this issue acknowledge that the overlap is striking. So anyway, just another little point there.
I sing your praises, Bill. I'm going to go ahead and move on to what I got for my next slide. One of these days I'll figure this out. So from that, I just think it's important to jump into everything about Mormonism. You've got Book of Mormon, keystone of their religion. And then from the Book of Mormon, you're supposed to be converted, that these are ancient prophets, and Joseph Smith is a true prophet of God. You'll know through Moroni's promise by praying about these things. And then what are the ramifications of that? Of once you believe that this book is true, you enter into a system. You enter into a high demand religion that expects you to pay 10% of your income and expects you to attend the temple regularly, serve in the temple, and do these ordinances for the dead, and take out these endowments for yourself, these things that are supposed to be these really important covenants that are binding. That's basically what humanity is meant to do, is do these covenants that seal families, that put you in a certain type of, strong relationship, strong covenant with your maker, with Heavenly Father, all through using the atonement of Jesus Christ. So far, so good, Bill, on that explanation of basically the way that the church is then asking you to operate. And so having an actual firm belief that the Book of Mormon is true and that Joseph Smith is a prophet, and then that Joseph Smith's revealed temple ceremonies and ordinances is a major problem for the church, because of how directly it borrows from the Masonic ceremonies that Joseph, we know, participated in back in the day. So I had a big problem going through the temple for the first time. A lot of people do, where you didn't realize Mormonism was this. You're like, oh, I knew about, the church stuff. I didn't know we'd be dressing in these robes, and I didn't know we'd be doing these different hand symbols, that this all felt very foreign. And we're told that these are, these ceremonies were given by God. And Bill, one of my very, very favorite, I bring this up every time we do a podcast, my favorite thing that Bill Reel has ever done is an episode about dogma, and comparing and reacting to a Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson debate about dogma and religious dogma, and that when things change over time, it is advantageous to the organization doing the change to not tell the members to sweep things under the rug, especially when they put things under the idea of things being sacred. But now we can't do that as much. We know too much. Not only can we compare all of the data of the Book of Mormon, we also have videos of what goes on in the temple for people who don't know, who should know what's going on before they even go and make those covenants. And then we have videos of what and evidence of what the Masons are up to, the outfits they're wearing, the handshakes that they do. And it's very obvious that when things need to change in the temple, when women are complaining about the sexism, or they're complaining about the throat slitting, again, something directly tied to what the Masons did in their oaths and their covenants and their ceremonies, when things need to change over time because of outside pressure from the outside in, it's just going to be advantageous to the organization to say that this is the way that God wants it. But my whole point here is saying, is this what God wanted? Is God a God of confusion? Or what is the most likely line of of rational thinking here when we know that there's just mountains of evidence that Joseph Smith plagiarized and borrowed directly from the Mason ceremony. So unless you have something else you want to say, I'm just going to play this clip again from Mike from LDS Discussions talking about the whole heap of problems we got going on here.
I'll have a chance to make a closing comment after that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just tell me if you want to pause at any time. For sure.
No, we're good.
Numbers, we weren't really told about most of them, but I think you can look at it and see they're all in the 19th century, and so we're told that these ideas are ancient with their origins in the church, but then when you look at them, they all tend to point back to a 19th century. And so this is a quote we've read before, but this is Richard Bushman, who is a faithful Mormon historian. He's a patriarch. He's very well regarded. And he says about the Book of Mormon, and then there is the fact that there is phrasing everywhere, long phrases that if you Google them, you'll find them in 19th century writings. The theology of the Book of Mormon is very much 19th century theology, and it reads like a 19th century understanding of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, we already read that. Let me just skip right to this slide, since we already read that Richard Bushman quote, which is the main thing that I wanted to do. But I love that Mike just also explains that we have a lot of data and we know too many things are borrowed. So again, from Mist and Sunday, you can see the grips and signs of Freemasonry. And there's a quote from Joseph Smith, History of the Church, Volume 4, page 550 says, March 1686, things are small, 1842. In the evening, I received the first degree in Freemasonry in the Nauvoo Lodge, assembled in my general business office. And then it goes on to say, in chapter 5 of Church History, again, Joseph Smith saying, this is 2 months later. In my general business office, or lodge room, that's where the Masonic fraternity meets occasionally, for want of a better place, in council with General James Adams of Springfield, Patriarch Hiram Smith, instructing them in the principles and order of the priesthood, attending to washings, anointings, endowments, and the communication of keys pertaining to the Aaronic priesthood, and so on to the highest order of the Melchizedek priesthood. So it's what's the analogy I'm trying to think of here? It's basically like Whitney Houston's song, My Name Is Not Susan. I don't know how else to put it. That sometimes you're in bed with so many similar things. You get your ideas and your names and your things are all kind of overlapping. Your general ideas are just like, this works for this situation here. I'm going to work it for this situation here. Anything you want to add? I got like a couple more of these, but
just that Mason, you're good, by the way, time wise. I'm fine. So Masonry being used in Mormonism, you've got another slide there where it talks about like the first token of the fellow craft or whatever. There's just no argument. Every apologist, every church leader, if you sit down with them, will acknowledge. Even Elder Holland couldn't avoid it when he sat down with the BBC guy from the British Broadcasting channel, and in that conversation, he acknowledges like, hey, essentially that Masonry and Mormonism are connected in this way. Joseph Smith, no ifs, ands, or buts, is taking Masonry, and to the point where the apologists try to dismiss it by saying, yeah, well, there's the endowment and then there's the presentation of the endowment, and Joseph's just using Masonry to present these truths. It's a vehicle to present these truths. And the reality is, once you steal Masonry away from that ritual, there really isn't a ton of stuff left in what's being given. It is the signs and tokens that allow you to pass the sentinels to enter heaven, as Brigham Young taught.
Yeah, exactly. When you're a young kid going through the temple and you're like, I didn't know that I needed to know certain handshakes and certain that there'd be there's certain knocking and certain passcodes that you need to say. That is not my construction of the God that I was worshiping. And that was a real blindsiding moment for me. Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, when you take those things away, why were they taken away? And again, you make that point in your Dogma podcast so perfectly of if we can't acknowledge the reasons that they were there in the first place, I'm going to go with some plagiarism, and then the reasons why they were taken away. That is a super important question to ask, because it wasn't bottomed down. It wasn't the church leader saying this throat slitting stuff is looking a little culty. No, they're sending out a flipping I can't think of the word right now. When you ask a bunch of people their opinions, but it's like a poll, but it's, you remember that paper?
Survey?
The survey, that's the word I was looking for.
Mhm.
Have you read that survey that came out around
Mm-hmm.
1990 before it was taken out? And it's, why is temple attendance down? And the church isn't coming from revelation that we need to fix these things and get more people in the doors to pay their tithing and go through temple work. It's through survey. It's through
And
them.
pilot programs, right?
And pilot
Prophets have
programs.
to test things out. Can't know
Right.
from God if it'll work or not.
Yeah. So like, again, to double down on the point of like, why were these things changed in the first place? Or why were they there in the first place? And then why were they changed? That is the reason. I always bring up that dogma podcast that you did, Bill, because it is the singular reason why I am so passionate about doing this in this ex-Mormon space, is that we know that through enough pressure from the bottom up and the outside in, that we can get the church to reform step by step on things that are dogmatic, that are harmful, that are backwards. And it's always going to come through outside pressure. So, leave the church, leave it alone. Ex-Mormons never shut up. And I'm like, I want to make Mormonism healthier for you. When you go to the temple, I hope you have a wonderful experience and connect with the divine, and you have the least amount of trauma. How do we get there? It's by talking about the places that could be changed that are very simply not that important for your spiritual progress. Like pretending to slit your throat,
Chris Murphy is one of the comments that are off to the side, and that person's saying that one of the Midnight Mormons reached out to them and said that there is evidence for early temple ceremony in the Apocrypha. I just want to note, like, certain sorts of rituals, signs, tokens go beyond Masonry and Mormonism. When someone raises their hand to a square, there's plenty of places in Christianity, going back, for instance, where those kinds of things are being seen or done. And so it is perfectly reasonable to expect you to find similarities to Mormonism or similarities to Masonry going back. But the fact is, Masonry doesn't go back beyond like the 15 or 1600s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the 1400s. And so this idea that it goes back to the Temple of Solomon in Mormonism, that's just not real. I know we told that story, you and I and everybody else, when 10, 20, 30 years ago, we all said the reason Masonry's there is because it goes back to the Temple of Solomon. And the Masonic ritual is a corrupted form of the endowment. Like, that's the story we told, in the same way that we told a story about the Bible translation in Mormonism, that it was the Bible was corrupted, pieces were removed, Joseph Smith had to restore it. And the reality is, today we now know it has contemporary material in it, and it really wasn't a restoration of an ancient text. That just doesn't make any sense in today's data. So you see the church back away from these things, just as you pointed out that the church is backing away from the Masonry, in that little by little the signs and tokens have been watered down to the point that rather than cut your throat, you simply hold your hand up to the square, but with your thumb extended as if it's still the knife that you're about to use in the step that's been removed, where you slit your throat, right?
Yeah, good point. Another quote from Miston Sunday. So this is the LDS Temple Endowment, 5 Points of Fellowship, that was removed in 1990. Peter says, the 5 points of fellowship are inside the right foot by the side of right foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, hand to back, and mouth to ear. And then the Masonic 5 points of fellowship from the 3rd degree Master Mason ritual is worshipful, or the worshipful master says, the 5 points of fellowship are foot to foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, hand to back, and cheek to cheek, or mouth to ear. Yeah. Also, you're lagging again, but you're not lagging in awesome commentary. So that's all I care about.
Just to note, again, that somebody's asking where in the Apocrypha that someone can see similarities to the endowment. One example would be the Apocalypse of Adam, where Adam is visited by 3 messengers and he's given secret code words and stuff in order to get back to heaven, I assume, but I haven't read the text in probably a decade. But I know the Apocalypse of Adam, if you read that, you would see some similarities to the Mormon endowment. That doesn't necessarily mean that the church is true, because there's some piece of evidence that meshes. You have to go with, like, what is the evidence against? What is the evidence for? Treat it like it's a scale, and ask, like, how unreasonable, how illogical, how irrational do I need to be to make those things work? And then the next slide you've got, I really want to see, because I think that's That one's even more telling about the Masonry. Yes, right here. This is my favorite one. If you disagree that Masonry is unconnected to Mormonism in 2022, I'm not trying to be rude. You're just ignorant and naive.
Yes, sir. Do you know what the W and the M and the SD stand for exactly? Or it's maybe not important, but it's just
something. Yeah. So S,
like the worshipful master, and then the
I don't know
guy,
what the SD. Yeah.
the person who's going through. Oh wait, it says the bottom. Senior deacon. Blessed.
Senior deacon. There you go.
Blessed be those who read the description. So this is the Masonic pass script of a fellow craft worshipful master to the senior deacon. What is that? The pass script.
Oh, I was going to tell you. Give you two parts.
Okay, great. Should we hold hands across the screen?
Let's. Here. All right, hold on. Let's go. Okay, you ready? Oh,
wait.
Yeah. Maybe.
Wait. Here we go.
Oh,
there we
gotta go this way.
Is it working?
Yeah. Go to the other side. Look at
Audio
this.
listeners, this is worth it. I have to. Yep. There we go.
Go to your other side. Use your other hand. There we go. Look at that.
That doesn't look right to me, though. We're not holding hands in this one.
Oh, it's almost though. It's really close.
Okay, well, it's reversed in mine, I guess. Anyway.
Oh, it's right in mine.
Okay. What is that?
The pass grip of the fellow craft.
Has it a name?
It has.
Will you give it to me?
I did not so receive it, neither will I so impart it.
But I will through the veil, or something else like that. Yeah.
That's so Mormon. Every Mormon's going to recognize that who's been to the temple, unless they've taken it out in the last 5 years.
Yeah, precisely. So,
plagiarism proven.
Yeah, and if I think video really is going to tell the story here. So, Thinker of Thoughts, Jonathan Streeter's channel is another one of my very favorites. So he has this video, Mormons versus Masons, and just to kind of read the description. He says, since the introduction of the Mormon temple endowment ceremony in 1842, the similarities between the sacred LDS ritual and the Masonic rituals for the entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason have been observed. One element in particular was the similar penalties assigned for violating oaths of secrecy. While the penalties were removed from the LDS temple ceremony in 1990, they were a prominent part of the ritual for over a century, and many men and women today remember their use. So let me just go ahead and play a couple of these clips. This one's kind of long, so if you want to jump in with any commentary, you just let me know. Mormons promise not to reveal
potentially the most powerful man in the world has sworn an oath, which he meant at the time, whatever it is now, that he must not tell anyone about what he's seen, lest he slit his throat.
That he would not tell anyone about his personal pledge to the Lord.
These elements are names, signs, postures, tokens, handshakes. Those are the only elements which members pledge to never reveal. This video does not violate that promise. After over a century in use, in 1990, non-essential elements of the ceremony were removed.
We do not have penalties in the temple.
You used to.
We used to.
This includes the penalties. The penalties were non-essential elements and are not sacred. I wonder why. I said that, not the video. So the question is, how similar were the penalties to Masonic oaths? And this video, you can watch some. All right, real quick. How many knocks was that?
3.
How many are there in the temple?
3 knocks. With that rubber mallet thing.
Filming the mysteries of Freemasonry is forbidden. So, using Masonic handbooks and helped by Master Masons, we have reconstructed the Brotherhood's rituals. Tonight, thousands of men all over Britain are performing these mystic rites.
First penalties for Freemasons go a little something like...
But the danger, which traditionally would have awaited you until your latest hour, was the physical penalty, a one time associated with the obligation of a Mason, that of having your throat cut across had you improperly disclosed the secrets of Masonry.
According to their own video, today's Masons steadfastly keep the secrets of the rituals for innocent, if masochistic reasons.
Well, it's part of, if one breaches Freemasonry, then you take certain oaths, and one of them is that you'd rather have your throat cut than to divulge secrets of Freemasonry.
Bill, you're lagging. You okay over there?
Yep.
You're kind of like stuck in one position.
Sorry, I'm good.
Is that not like the exact same language that you would rather have your throat cut than divulge the secrets that you learn in the temple?
There we are. There's a little bit of Mormonism underneath all that Masonic stuff.
And Jamie said, how did you find this? I've never been able to find these reconstructions. I'm telling you, I did some digging. They're all on YouTube, and they'll all be in the description underneath this YouTube video. But these are the things I just want to present, the things that convinced me that I saw, back in 2019, that I think when you lay it together in a 2.5, 3-hour YouTube video, pretty undeniable,
The sign is given by drawing the hand smartly across the throat and dropping it to the side. This is an allusion to the symbolic penalty at one time included in the degree, which implied that as a man of honor, a Mason would rather have his throat cut across than improperly disclose the secrets.
I don't think anybody very seriously believes that these threats will be carried out. But this doesn't detract from the psychological force of it.
Very similar to Mormons. First penalty for Mormons. In 1984, a covert audio recording was made. Parts referring to penalties are not essential or sacred and have since been removed. We're getting redundant on that one, sorry. Listening to these extracted segments is not a violation of temple covenants. So if you've made those, have a listen.
We will now given to you the first token of the Aaronic priesthood with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty. Before doing this, however, we desire to impress upon your minds the sacred character of the first token of the Aaronic priesthood with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty, as well as that of all other tokens of the holy priesthood with their names, signs, and penalties, which you will receive in the temple this day. They are most sacred and are guarded by solemn covenants and obligations of secrecy, to the effect that under no condition, even at the peril of your life, will you ever divulge them except at a certain place that will be shown you hereafter. The representation of the execution of the penalties indicates different ways in which life may be taken.
Some scary, serious stuff, right? And says later the penalty is described, and yeah, pretty word for word here.
The execution of the penalty is represented by placing the thumb under the left ear, the palm of the hand down, and by drawing the thumb quickly across the throat to the right ear and dropping the hand to the side. I will now explain the covenant and obligation of secrecy which are associated with this token, its name, sign, and penalty, and which you will be required to take upon yourselves. If I were receiving my own endowment today and had been given the name of John as my new name, I would repeat in my mind these words after making the sign, at the same time representing the execution of the penalty. I, John, covenant that I will never reveal the first token of the Aaronic priesthood with its accompanying name, sign, and penalty. Rather than do so, I would suffer my life to be taken. All around.
Anything you want to comment before I move on there?
That is
Bill?
so contrary to Sunday Mormonism.
I know.
When I went to the temple the first time, in my head, I thought, wow, what is this crazy stuff I've gotten myself into? And then the next thought I thought, very different, but and it brought a different emotion, but I thought, I feel like I'm at a baker's convention. I mean, look at these hats. Look at the strings tied to the shoulder. And again, it's not to mock the Mormon thing. It's to go like, we took Masonry, this weird thing, and we put it and made it Mormonism. And it's just such a strange thing.
Yeah. I remember going through the temple for the first time and getting in the car and just, being so blindsided and so confused and just assuming that then somebody's going to explain everything that just happened and where it came from.
Yeah.
And I asked my mom, like, so what was that? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, how do I learn more about what just happened? She goes, no, you just go a bunch of times and you just find meaning in it. And I had like a little panic. This is 6 days before my wedding. You know, people go through and they make these covenants. The only way you'll ever get to have, you know, sex that's at least signed off and ordained by your friends and family is by going through this ritual, getting married in the temple, or going on a mission, and just all of the pressures that go into like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna pretend to slit my throat, or things like that. And then just that crisis that a lot of people feel like, oh, I have to go do that. When people say they're going to the temple, like, you know, you see people leave with their bags and their nice clothes on, they're gonna go to do temple work for the dead. Oh, that's so sweet. Is it like baptisms? No, it's a pretty scary, culty stuff, really boring and just repetitive. And then you realize you're like, I have to do that exact same ceremony pretty much every week if I want to be a good standing member of the church. I would rather die.
I chose to try to avoid endowments as much as I could. And instead I tried to do other ordinances. So I would go into initiatories and allow grown men to touch me with oil and water because I thought the endowment was too weird.
Yeah, I used to go hurt my back for like an hour doing sitting across the altar doing sealings for dead married couples. That's a cute date night. Is that the strangest?
Isn't that beautiful?
Date night all the time.
Sitting across the altar from some 80-year-old lady doing proxy work for couples. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Fun date nights, I tell you. Second penalty, Freemasons.
The sign is given by drawing your right hand flat with the palm of it next to your breast, across your breast from the left to the right side with some quickness, and dropping it down by your side.
And then I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next slide because I think that one has the video of it, which I know is more sacrilegious, but what else are we at this point? Why is that doing that? So this is another video, Mormon and Masonic temples, that I think
that looked familiar.
That does look familiar. Mormon temple endowment.
The first token of the Aaronic priesthood is given by clasping the right hands and placing the joint of the thumb.
The first token of the Aaronic priesthood is a Masonic symbol. Like, I don't understand the endowment, the presentation of the endowment. It's such a strange thing to go like, oh, like that's just the way.
Oh, sorry, one second. Sorry.
That's the first token of the Aaronic priesthood. God says that's the first token of the Aaronic priesthood, and it's a Masonic sign that Joseph Smith learned in the 1840s in Nauvoo.
And then when you just, add that to the whole evidence of plagiarism, what are we left to find out? You know, I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. I am just seeker of truth. I'm trying to do my best here. I liked Mormonism while I was in it. I had a great time in a lot of ways. No trauma. Only trauma was finding out it wasn't true. But what am I supposed to believe if I'm just trying to be an honest pursuit of truth here, you know? Let me fast forward that part since we already watched it. Oh, damn it. I am not
that was
a professional.
different. That was the second knuckle. So that doesn't count. That's not the first knuckle. So it's not a word for word plagiarism. Right. So it's just a
I just need to skip a tiny bit.
The first token of the priesthood with its accompanying name and sign. This token is given by clasping the right hands and placing the joint of the thumb between the first and second knuckles of the hand in this manner.
So we're talking like
these four marks are the marks of the holy priesthood.
I was knuckles deep in
and
Mormonism.
Corresponding marks are found in your individual garment. On the right is the mark of the square. It is placed in the garment over the right breast, suggesting to the mind exactness and honor in keeping the covenants entered into this day. On the left is the mark of the compass. It is placed in the garment over the left breast, suggesting to the mind an undeviating course leading to eternal life, a constant reminder that desires, appetites, and passions are to be kept within the bounds the Lord has set.
and that all truth may be circumscribed into one great whole.
Then it shows Masonic, the square, the compass, the exact like kind of symbolage, if that's a word, from the Masons that are on our garments.
You shall receive it upon the
5 points of fellowship used with the veil of the Mormon Endowment.
The 5 points of fellowship are inside of right foot, by the side of right foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, hand to back, and mouth to ear. The Lord then gives the name of this token and asks.
And then it just kind of goes through and does some more Mason videos. I have a link in, again, my bio, not in my bio. Link, I'm so used to saying link in bio. Link in the description with all of these videos. This one is from, the one I just played is from Is the Church True YouTube channel. So if you're interested in watching more of those side-by-sides, yeah, there's people who have the audio recordings from pre-1990. There's reenactions. The Godmakers film has one of them. And then this one as well. So what are we really left to conclude here, Bill Reel? This is the wrap up.
Yeah, so let me tell you. So let's see here if I got this right. We talked about how the late war and first book of Napoleon have a ton of similarity to the Book of Mormon, language and theme points. We talked about Joseph Smith's dream of the tree of life that is in Lehi's dream, Joseph Smith Sr., and Lehi having the same vision, essentially. We talked about Third Isaiah. We talked about heirs of the 1769 Bible. We talked about Paul in 1 Corinthians and Moroni in chapter 10 being overlapping and they shouldn't be there. We talked about Mormon and Mark chapter 16, 17, and verse 17 and 18 being in Moroni chapter 9, verse 24, and that shouldn't be there. We talked about the Apocrypha and how the word Nephi was in there. And so apologists like to say that was a great creative word that has Egyptian meaning to it. So Joseph got a bullseye. Meanwhile, it's already in the Bible. We've got Isaiah chapter 2, verse 16, which was the King James Version versus the NRSV version and how those errors were carried over. We talked about the inspired Bible translation with Adam Clark. We talked about, we didn't talk about this one. This is Alma the Younger and Paul's conversion in the New Testament have a ton of overlap. We talked about the sermons of Joseph Smith's day within the Methodist Church in the camp meetings being similar to the sermons in the Book of Mormon, including King Benjamin. We talked about Masonry in the temple, and we talked about the Book of Moses being found also the similar themes and language from Matthew and Luke. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we've got 14 points of plagiarism, and some of those are extremely strong. And now every believing Mormon has to figure out that watches this, what they're going to do with that. My 2 cents is that when you decide to ask the question, what if it's not true? And then pull out the scale in your mind and put all the evidence. Because today we didn't talk about the problems with the Book of Abraham per se. We didn't talk about polyandry, polygamy to young brides. We didn't talk about the religious coercion used. We didn't talk about the folk magic and treasure digging at length. When you add it all together, it is absurd for Mormonism to add up and be true. The scale is so lopsided. And if you're going to hang on to chiasms and NHM, then I think you really are taking the weaker argument. The rational mind, when dealing with this data, will always decide that the church cannot add up. It is not what it claims to be.
100%. And that was a great retelling of the things that we talked about.
Those were the notes I was making as we were talking.
Beautiful. So in summary, just the general other themes of what those lists of things mean to me is that, so is there any way that Joseph Smith could have written, the way that church frames it, he couldn't have written the Book of Mormon in 70 days because it's too complex, too sophisticated. But that's completely flying in the face of the fact that he was relying heavily on outside stories and passing off revelations in so many different ways, not just the Book of Mormon, the other things, to make himself look inspired. In that context, is it that hard to write a book if you've got, 75% of it written for you already.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead.
And there are other books out there that are along the same lines. I don't remember what the name of it is, the Tarantia or something like that. But there's other religious text out there that people propose were written quickly and were written kind of just out of thin air, essentially. And every Mormon would look at those books and go like, those aren't true. And then you got guys like J.R. Tolkien who write Lord of the Rings that has intricate geographies, intricate histories, intricate culture, rituals, things stay very consistent, dating stays consistent, and people go like, oh, there's another one. Like to propose that Joseph Smith did something extremely unique. It's the Book of Urantia. Rebecca just wrote it in there. To say that he did something that no one else has ever done, that's only believers inside the church with a very limited awareness of what has been done that say things like that. That's just not true.
So the other things I wanted to add, so yeah, there's the idea also that like, so if the things that Joseph Smith, one way or another, the ways that he got them, if the things that he said are inspired, they were inspired then, the books of scripture that we've canonized, if the things that Joseph Smith said were inspired, why does there need to be so much reframing and a new narratives around how Joseph would have got these things now and not, 50 or 100 years ago? Like, is the world not moving in a more progressive place? Is the world not moving in a more critically minded place, with people recognizing patterns, being able to talk to each other through the internet, recognizing unhealthy patterns of religions? Enough people saying at this point in time, since, I would say the last couple decades of church baptisms declining and membership declining, that people are not willing to say enough is it that it's just not good enough. It's not good enough to keep on believing something that it's not only just flawed, it's actually downright plagiarized, and it's made up, and it's a collection of other things. So if it was started on the idea that it was inspired, and then we know that it's collected, it's remixed, is that good enough for a lot of people to stay active and, wanting to baptize and raise their kids in these things that have all these other, culty type aspects into it? Where we know that before, do members deserve to know, is kind of the point I'm making. Do members deserve to know where their religion was remixed from before they give their time and their money and their devotion and, set themselves up for a lifetime of raising their kids within this church? Whereas if they had seen all these parallels to begin with, the old informed consent point that I always get from John DeLynn, maybe they would have made very different decisions with their lives, or loved people differently, or chosen a more autonomous path for themselves, etc. So in summary, these things are needing to be recontextualized by modern apologists because our brains are getting too big.
Totally.
Is there anything else you want to add? And then I have one last final clip that summarizes it from Chris Johnson.
Just to say that, everybody gets to make choices. If you want to hold on to comfortable beliefs and choose to allow lots of allowances and conjecture, you have a right to. I think everybody in this world believes something that isn't true. There are people in Scientology, there are people in the Jehovah's Witnesses that understand their history and they still believe it. If it does all that good for you and you're really certain that it does good for you, that's great. I'm a little nervous if you end up having a gay kid or a gay grandkid. I'm a little nervous if you come from a family that is people of color. I'm a little nervous of various people who report being marginalized and traumatized by the LDS Church. But maybe for you, it's good. For me, I want to be a truth seeker. The church taught me that. I really value getting to the bottom line, and I think of myself as a rational thinker, and I want to weigh the argument, and I don't want to be irrational. I don't want to waste my time 20 years in a religion that turned out to not be true. And as I've deconstructed it and decided that, hey, the evidence is so strong that the church isn't true. And as I've stepped away, I've felt nothing but happiness from that. I've made peace with that, and I feel good about it, and my life is good. And I think the story that when people leave, again, they're going to go through grieving stages, but the idea that people leave and everything is just horrible for them. I think for most people, once they get away from the stages of grief and the reconstruction of their identity in the immediate aftermath, I think when you get some time separation, most people look back and go, I am better off having allowed myself to ask, is this thing true? And then having weighed the data and went with the rational answer that it's not, my life is better.
Exactly. And as Chris just said, and the truth shall make you free. Or said like as Jim Carrey at the end of A Liar Liar.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted to wrap up on. Perfectly said. And I'm going to end on Chris Johnson's words at the end of that that presentation that we showed earlier.
And I have a few more minutes, but I just want to say I believe truth is important, and this changed my life. Truth is marching forward because of technology. We have the internet, we have computers, we have tools. I am not worried about the next generation. When I was a Mormon, I was worried that it's the end of the world. But I think the next generation are going to have tools that are even better than what I used to create this and what my brother used to help me. Their computers will be faster. Their algorithms will be more powerful and easier to use. You'll probably be able to use Siri or Google now in about 5 or 10 years to do the same thing we just did. We are entering an age where you cannot lie to people like Joseph Smith lied to people. Okay. Conclusion. Just a little twist. It is possible that the Book of Mormon is true. But how can we know? How can we know with our hearts that the Book of Mormon is true? There's a promise. This is the promise.
If I had been a little child when Jesus lived on earth,
being filled with the Holy Spirit. What happened to that individual on the cross beside Jesus who believed and Jesus said, "This day thou shalt be with me"?
I'm not going to deny I feel the Spirit. Like I love those church songs, love that elevated emotion, love
Elevation emotion worked well.
Yeah, those are, how could there be anything wrong when the kids' voices are so sweet? I'm like, this takes me back.
Paradise. He knew that he seriously believed. And that he knew that's all that it took, is for him to believe who he was. Even believing him in a condition when he was being killed as a heretic.
Who was this man? We're going to begin tonight with the strange suicide of the 39.
It was as bizarre as it was shocking. 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult dead from an overdose of vodka and phenobarbital.
The kingdom of God.
So just in case that went over anyone's heads, I just want to make it clear that the way that Chris Johnson edited this video was with a lot of beautiful children singing and LDS themed imagery and music, but with the Heaven's Gates guy. Do you know his name?
Apple something. Applewhite? Mr. Applewhite. I think it's Applewhite.
Mr. Applewhite.
Yeah.
With a voice that sounds exactly like a Mormon testimony of like, he just knew the truth, that kind of language. But then it zooms out and it reveals that it's not somebody from your church talking. It's a cult leader. Maybe it is someone from your church talking. Just kidding. Okay. So just make sure that's not lost on anybody.
God, the kingdom of heaven.
The group's leader, Marshall Applewhite, also known as Doe, left behind a rambling videotaped statement that tried to explain what he and his followers had done.
They believed that he was basically an alien being who had been Jesus 2,000 years ago, who had come to Earth to find the other aliens that had been on Earth, to evacuate before Earth was destroyed.
This was a tragic loss of life. Why did these 39 people believe that Applewhite was the true Messiah? What convinced them that Applewhite's message was true? Why did they take their life? Let's take a look at the method he used to convince his new recruits that he was the true Messiah.
The mind that was in Jesus, what? That mind is in me? At least ponder this, that you go into the privacy of your closet. Don't ask your neighbors, your friends, what they think of this. You go see if you can connect with the purest, highest source that you might consider God and say, what about this? Is this for real? Is this for me? If it is, then give me the strength. Because as soon as you tell anyone else, they will be used as the instruments to have you not believe. We hope that your thoughts will be of our Father's kingdom. Thank you.
Did this technique work?
And I knew, my soul knew, that it had what I'd been searching for a long time, and I knew it even before I read it. And I knew it was, when I got those statements, I just couldn't stop reading because I knew. And ever since I've been in the class, there's never been a doubt.
Like when I first met them, I knew that what they had to say was true. It wasn't something they said, it was something that I knew inside me. I felt it was like I had known the material they were talking about, and it was like a recognition.
I feel extreme.
Yeah, so that I thought was just a good place to end. That's where Chris ends his video about this data that they have plugged into these computers, and to be able to show, these plagiarisms and these remixes that Joseph Smith took from his time. But it really, it doesn't mean anything unless somebody is really ready to be radically honest about how we actually go for the pursuit of truth, the actual epistemology of how do we know what's true versus somebody who's trapped in a false religion, because we can point those out. But if you're willing to just smooth all of Chris's data over, you're willing to smooth over all of the plagiarisms that you find, because the spirit has told you that yours is true overall, you're not being intellectually honest, and you're no different than somebody else who's trapped in a false religion.
Yeah, totally. The Holy Ghost works in all religions that try to use something like the Holy Ghost. When people are manipulated with the right words and language, people will feel things. And Jonathan Haidt has done a ton of research that shows that people can be falsely manipulated with what they perceive as something happening, but in reality, something very different is happening, and can be tricked into feeling those same feelings to the point where it is expressed as warmth in your chest, your hair standing up on your arm. You feel feelings of peace and goodness about what you're seeing, and that you are part of a bigger thing than just yourself. Elevation emotion certainly works.
Right on. So all this is an important context if you need to understand how our brains work psychologically speaking, because religions are not just completely individualistic, you could say. Religions come with a lot of warm feelings that you're told what to label those feelings, you're told what they mean in relation to the group dynamics at large, and then you're trained to want to continue those emotions and continue your adherence to that because of the social and the benefits that you get, regardless of the data, regardless of the plagiarisms that should tell you that it's not a true thing. And Bill, do you have any other final things to wrap up? Because I have to mention two things in everything that I do, which is your dogma episode and Jonathan Streeter's he has a video and a blog post called How to Fix Your Faith Crisis with this one weird trick.
Wood tools and steel
wood
tools.
Versus steel tool. Wood tools versus steel tools. And so if you're doubting You don't know up from down. There are answers to questions which should keep someone in a false faith bound to that deception. Only a small section of these wood tools that he describes, but each one of them have the power to quell doubt in a false religion and keep the seeker trapped. So everything that we just explained in this, if you still are employing these thought-stopping cliches, these wood tools that Jonathan Streeter calls them, the things that we just saw in the Heaven's Gate, if you're still willing to play this game, that you know that if somebody that you know is trapped in a false religion used these, you would try to get them out. But Mormons so often want to employ them on themselves with like some kind of like special pleading fallacy almost. Things like, I just want to put it on the screen real quick and then we'll wrap up because these are so important. If you hear your friends or family using them, send them this article. Things like, it's not important to your salvation. Don't think about it anymore. Well, you weren't there at the time, so you can't judge the actions of our founder and early leaders. We can't judge behavior in the past by today's standards. Things that seem wrong today weren't so bad back then. Think of every cult leader, every false religion has used these same types of phrases. That means that they're not actually helpful at getting to the roots of what's actually true. And I want to live my life believing as many true things as possible. If God commands something, that it's right, even if it would otherwise be considered wrong. We will find the answers to your troubling questions in the afterlife. Until then, you must simply have faith. And that is a mystery that God uses to test our faith. And the list goes on and on. So if you guys have anything else that you want to add, please leave it in the comments below. Bill, any other final words? Where can people find your information?
Yeah, so MormonDiscussions.org is the umbrella site. You can see all of the podcasts that we offer. Some of them have nothing to do with Mormonism. One and such is Almost Awakened. It has nothing to do with Mormonism. It's really trying to help you folks as you've deconstructed Mormonism. You're on the other side to try to create a healthier you and a healthier outside world to you. Another one is Emancipate Your Mind, which is a great podcast that helps you process the trauma of a faith crisis and having stepped away. There's tons of them there.
Cognitive Dissonance, it's my favorite one.
Cognitive Dissonance, where we try to tackle the psychology of belief and why people believe what they do. And we use examples within other religions as well as Mormonism. In MormonDiscussionPodcast.org is where you can listen to all of the content that we produce. And every podcast has its own site as well. We're also on YouTube at Mormon Discussions Incorporated. If you look that up on YouTube, you'll find it. And otherwise, this has been a ton of fun. You put a lot of stuff together, and we covered a lot of ground. I never thought when we started that we would cover 14 or 15. There was a 15th one. Somebody in the comments mentioned Emanuel Swedenborg and the 3 degrees of glory. Also, the word of wisdom was copied from some of the stuff from that day. So there's actually 16
we got to do a part 2.
We'll have to do it. But great stuff. You covered so much ground today, and the commenters were great too.
Yeah, this was super fun. It took a long time to watch a lot of the videos and organize my thoughts. And I had a couple panic attacks yesterday. But I was like, let's just make this a totally bomb clip show that I hoped somebody would have put together these kind of clips in this order with this type of description when I was going through my faith crisis 3 years ago. Or maybe it's something that you can share with somebody who needs the case maybe laid out a little bit more to them. So I'd really appreciate if you listeners could do me a real solid. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and like it and do things for the algorithm, like leave a little comment below, even if it's just like a Masonic symbol, if you can. That'd be great. I'm sure you can find some inside the emoji toolbar. And I spent a lot of time on this video, and I want to keep doing more in-depth things like this. I do love doing satire and comedy, and that won't go away at all. But between just doing long format things and things that have some ad revenue on YouTube, this helps my family pay the bills. So I'm really appreciative to everybody on Patreon who supports me. You can go over there and subscribe for a couple dollars and throw me a couple bucks, and that really boosts my spirits and keeps me going. I also have a donor box that John DeLynn said, just tell the audience you're going to keep pumping out good content, and just hopefully people will come on. A little reoccurring donation of a few bucks a month would be super helpful. And other than that, I'm just super grateful to Bill Reel, the person I first listened to, where I said, I don't know, I'm pretty sure the church is true, but I'll give this guy a listen. And now we're doing YouTube videos together.
That poor Clinton accent.
That poor Clinton accent. Yeah, I'm too nervous right now to attempt it, but
yeah. Great work. By the way, folks, send her a recurring donation. That means, again, for those who do a one-time great bless you for doing that. But for those who do a recurring donation, it's so much more helpful to be able to plan ahead when you know that a certain amount is coming in each month.
True.
It makes things so much easier. So folks, don't hesitate to help support Kara here and the work that she does on her channel and on her live streams.
Thank you so much, Bill. And
Cool.
make sure you guys check out all of the links in the description below if you wanted more sources on all of those things. And then if you're interested, I have a link tree also in the description that I put in a Google Doc of all of my favorite sources of, hey, I think the church might not be true. And I just go, Google link. So I really am in this space because I'm just trying to help people sort through the messiness of Mormonism as I was leaving. And here I am 3 years later. So I just love this community. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. Thanks for supporting Bill. And I will see everybody tomorrow. I'm doing a live stream with Spencer Nugent, Blacksmo from TikTok. So look forward to that tomorrow. And another video with Kyle Bishop talking about shadow work on Monday. And then another video with John DeLynn talking about top 15 things Mormon missionaries will not tell you. So those are my next 3 planned videos. I'm a little workhorse working on all these fun ideas coming to fruition. So again, thank you everybody for your support and have a great day.
Love it. Have a great day, Kara.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Bye.
Take it easy.